Chapter 1, Beauty and Danger. Metropolis, Imperial Grace Bar. A girl clad in a simple t-shirt and a pair of black shorts pulled down her cap and walked out from the inside and turned straight into an alley behind. She stopped in front of a trash can and surveyed her surroundings. After she made sure that she was alone, she hastily fished out some papers showing her blood test results, took out a lighter, lit the few pieces of paper on fire, and watched as they transformed into ash. Immediately, Dawn Tyme called for a cab. The bar was not located right smack at Metropolis city center but was a little towards the sides, which gave it a longer alleyway. Dawn looked at the time and gestured for the cab driver to drive faster since she was in a rush. Screech! Suddenly, from the alleyway in front, a blinding light shone without warning onto the car that Dawn was in, forcing the cab driver to brake so he could shield his eyes from that bright beam. Thump thump thump. There was a frantic and violent knocking on the cab. There were also yelling and hooting of "Leave the women, and you can leave. Come down quickly, what are you still dilly-dallying about? Faster, faster, faster." The cab driver was frightened out of his wits by the sudden and violent cries. He looked back at Dawn in bewilderment and was shaking like a leaf. Was he about to be killed by bandits? Dawn frowned as she assessed the situation outside and glanced at the driver who was extremely shaken. There were cars in front and behind them, and it seemed impossible to escape. She could not involve this innocent driver. "Open the door, sir, I'll go down," Dawn instructed the driver calmly. "After I get down, no matter what you hear, don't turn back." When the door was open, Dawn was yanked down by one of the leading men. Taking this opportunity, the cab driver jammed his foot down on the accelerator and zoomed away. "May I know what crime is it that I have committed against you, fellow gentlemen?" Dawn looked at the troop of more than 10 men before her, some of which were armed with baseball bats, and felt dismayed. She wanted to at least die with the knowledge of what was going on. If you want money, name a price. Money can be earned again, so life-preserving yielded top priority. Slap. "Stop with your nonsense." A burly voice rang out, followed by a tight, resounding slap on Dawn's charming face. It burned. The slap was so unexpected Dawn had no time to guard herself. Dawn tugged at the corner of her mouth and spat out some blood. She glared venomously at the leader of the troop and took the chance to assess the situation before her once again. She could not just stand there and await death. The leader was a meaty man with an oily face and a limping leg, hence the walking stick. He was not very tall. Dawn had a habit of carrying a dagger at her waist at all times, but she was outnumbered by her opponents, and her arms were seized in a lock hold. She could not fight her way out of this, so she could only outsmart them. "Someone paid for your face." The meaty man grasped Dawn's chin firmly, turned it left and right as he admired her face. Such a beauty, what a shame to have to slash this open. He was mesmerized by Dawn's exquisiteness, and his eyes began to be tainted by perverted humor. He carefully scanned Dawn's outfit from head to toe. She was wearing a slightly figure-hugging t-shirt with petite black shorts that accentuated her bombastic curves. The slap on her face colored her with a shade of frail innocence, and it made the meaty man salivate. Dawn took in what was happening, and before the other men could speak, she put on a fake alluring, coquettish tone. "You look like such a strong, brave man, Pappy. I've never seen anyone so charming and strong. How have I angered you, Pappy, for you to treat me like this?" Her tears were welled up in her eyes as soon as she was done. Her entire demeanor was so demure it made people want to hold her in the palm of their hands. She did not care about the scalp-tinglingly disgusting tone of her voice any longer, since she was willing to do all she could to stay alive. The man's habitual desire for conquest and the vanity of being looked up to made the meaty man lose his sobriety, and all that was left in his eyes was wretchedness as he stroked his mouth like a pervert and swallowed his saliva. "How do you want Pappy to treat you, beautiful?" His tone was flirty and lewd. "As long as you don't hit me, Pappy, I'm willing to serve you properly." Dawn looked up at the meaty man with doleful eyes while looking frail and endearing. Her lips were enticingly plump, her demeanor was demure yet alluring. It was this look that would cause all men to stop thinking, lie over her, and lead her to experience the strong and courageous conquest of a man's masculinity. The meaty man thought, I can just enjoy myself first, then slash her face later to appease my employer, right? It's so hard to find exquisite beauty like her. Besides, how could she even run with 10 other men around? Release her. The meaty man could not wait any longer as he gestured for the 2 men holding her down to release her and said, I'll enjoy myself before we act. Bro, let us enjoy ourselves too after you please. He. The other people had their carnal desires ignited by Dawn as well, so as soon as they heard their leader voice out, they wanted their fair share too. Sure. So let's see who would make our beauty the happiest then. Haha. In a wave of his hand, the meaty man had his subordinates release Dawn immediately, and they pushed her in his direction. This was her chance. As Dawn was about to fall headfirst into the embrace of the meaty man, she leaped and appeared behind him, as she quickly fished out her dagger, which was immediately held across the meaty man's neck. In a shrill voice, she ordered, Ask your men to let me go. You wench. How dare you trick me? The meaty man was furious, his fists were balled tight as he could not wait to pummel Dawn to her death if he could. How dare she embarrass him in front of his brothers? Big bro. The other men saw how meaty man was held hostage, so they shrieked in panic. Meaty men glared at them and bellowed, Wench, you underestimated me. Ah! In an instant, all Dawn could see was white before she could barely open her eyes. Meaty man had white powder in his walking stick. When he pressed a button on his stick just now, the powder sprayed Dawn and covered her face, temporarily blinding Dawn. You little wench, how dare you play tricks on me? I'll show you what evil means. The meaty man started to unbuckle his belt as he hollered at his subordinates behind him. All together now, brothers. This wench likes to be adventurous, right? Let's give her an adventure then. Dawn frantically slapped away the powder on her face, and when she finally got her vision back, she saw a troop of perverts walking towards her while undressing. Their eyes were lewd, perverted, wretched-filled. Dawn started to panic. This was the first time she felt so terrifyingly helpless. Men were rubbing their hands as they all reached out to Dawn. The darkness before her eyes got Dawn's pupils to dilate and constrict quickly. She closed her eyes, just as she was about to resign to her fate. Suddenly, she felt her body lightened as a huge force yanked her up. She opened her eyes in a panic only to see a flash of a shadow kicking away a bunch of men in a roundhouse kick. Choirs of men grunting in pain filled the night. Some of them were muttering curses as they tried to get up and fight, only to have their knees give way when they recognized the man before them. This man was no other than Jeon Mose, the most terrifying man in all of Metropolis. Scram now. The man in black beside Jeon screamed. Mose. The meaty man could not stop stuttering. He got up quickly and ran helter-skelter, leaving his subordinates behind as they watched him escape, and later followed his footsteps as well. Dawn, who was scared to death prior to this, was so enticed by the good looks of her savior she forgot about the thrill of narrowly escaping from the devil's claws. The man before him had a white button-down shirt that was tucked neatly in his suit pants. He was muscular and tall, his facial features were so perfect it looked like a jade-sculpted masterpiece, flawless. Other than his eyes that looked like they were piercing her soul with bottomless depth, while inducing a bone-seeping chill down the spine, his perfect facial features exuded such bewitching charm, causing its beholder to fall with just one look. Chapter 2, My Husband Has a Temper. Jeon Mose hated being stared at. His eyes darkened and glared at her until she retracted her gaze. Thank you for rescuing me. Dawn Tyme came back to her senses and expressed her gratitude towards Jeon. If he did not appear, who knew what disgusting things would take place? Jeon scanned Dawn up and down and frowned. There was an odd familiarity. There was a gleam in his eyes, but he did not want to stay any longer, so he turned around and was about to leave. Dawn looked quizzically at the man who had turned around coldly and thought, is he mute? What a waste of that bewitchingly handsome face. As she watched his silhouette, it hit her. This man was able to scare the meaty man's gang of 10 away just like that. He must be someone of fame and influence, so would he know who her husband whom she had not seen before was? On that thought, Dawn chased behind him and hollered at him. "Hi. Please wait a minute. Can I ask for another favor, please?" Jian turned back and looked at her curiously. His eyebrows raised, gesturing for her to name her plea. Could you please not tell anyone about what happened today, my hero? My husband has a temper and he's irrationally unpredictable. If he knew that I'd gotten out in the middle of the night, he would skin me alive. Since you've rescued me, I don't think you want to see my life being endangered again, right? Dawn looked earnestly at Jian as she waited for him to say yes. Jian grunted coldly, then he walked away. He was merely against people wreaking havoc in his territory. He did not care about any other things. He's not a mute. As Dawn watched his figure disappear, she muttered, "He does look good. Too bad I already have a husband." Then, she left in the opposite direction. She felt a wave of sadness as she thought about her supposed husband. This was the second day of her married life, but she has not even met her husband yet. Dawn was supposed to be the daughter of Metropolis prime patrician family the Tymes, but she was switched at birth by Xiaoban Neve, the wife of Tymes' family driver. Xiaoban switched her daughter in to become a Tyme instead. When Dawn had learned about what happened, she was already labeled as the ungrateful sinner of the Tymes, courtesy of Xiaoban and her biological daughter. She was known as the woman who paid kindness with wretchedness to the Tyme family. Xiaoban had severely injured Dawn's biological mother, Nancy James, the Lady of Tyme, and Dawn herself had a very rare blood type of O-negative. The entire Tyme family was waiting for Dawn to come back so she could donate blood to Nancy in her final moments in life, but she was knocked out on her journey back, causing her to miss the chance to save Nancy. When she woke up again, a week had passed. She did not even get to see her own mother for the last time. After that, in front of the entire Tyme family, Xiaoban accused Dawn of delaying Nancy's life-saving process due to her gallivanting with random men outside. This made the entire Tyme family loathe her, mad at her, and painfully disgusted with her. All these years, Dawn was used to Xiaoban, who was self-proclaimed as her mother, and her accusations towards her. It was all thanks to her excellent mother, Xiaoban, that the entire aristocratic community was appalled with her. When she was younger, she thought that Xiaoban merely valued her male child more when she refused to educate her, and when she showered her with beatings and scolding. Now, she had finally realized that it was all a ploy. Xiaoban wanted her to be reviled, shunned and spat on by others, so one day when the Tymes were to discover the truth, a noble aristocratic family like the Tymes would not be willing to take her back. Right after that, Jian Mos came and forcefully asked the Tymes for a hand in marriage. The entire metropolis knew that Jian was a man whose infamy was used to stop toddlers from fussing at night. He was vicious, ruthless, and ferocious. Rumor had it that Jian was ruthless and cruel. Rumor had it that there was a cellar in the Mos villa that was filled with poisonous snakes to punish people that went against the Mos family. Rumor had it that Jian's hands were stained with blood from so many lives, and he was addicted to torturing people for fun. Rumor had it that Jian knew no emotions. All he knew was, "You disobey me, you die." Rumor had it that Jian was a staunch believer of violence being the most effective troubleshooting way. How could the Tymes bear to have their daughter marry over to someone like this? Alas, Dawn took it upon herself to marry Jian on behalf of the Tymes, on the condition of the Tymes legally adopting her. She would not allow Xiaoban and Sheena to continue with their wretched way. She had to return to the Tyme family, she had to watch over the Tyme family, even if it meant sacrificing her marriage so Mama Nancy could rest in peace. "Sir Mose, do you want to go back tonight?" the man in black asked respectfully. In the dark of night, Jian and the man in black climbed into a black Rolls-Royce. Jian frowned at the sound of that. He was slightly irritated, but instead of answering the question, he asked, "Any news?" Jean, the man in black sighed. "Still none." Jian had been looking for a girl for more than 10 years, and there has not been a day when he had stopped looking for her, even if he had nearly flipped the whole world upside down. He would dream of her blurry face and the clear heart-shaped scar on her right shoulder. Sir Mose, you've now married a daughter of the Tyme family. What if you found that girl and she's bothered by it? Jean was a little worried. Fortunately, there was no wedding ceremony. All they did was to bring the girl over from the Tymes. No one knew about it except for the Moses and the Tymes. The daughter of Tyme is nothing more than a decor piece. The day I find her is the day that she will disappear. Menace flashed through Jian's eyes, but it was soon replaced by sorrow. The only reason I married her was to fulfill my mother's last wishes, since there was nothing else she wanted more when she was alive. The stars shone brightly that night. In the fastest speed she could muster, Dawn sneaked back into Regal de Meaux's villa. After changing out of her clothes, she rushed into the bathroom hoping no one noticed that she had been out. She stood in front of the mirror after her bath and saw that the exquisite, charming face of her had started to swell. What a strong slap from the meaty man. Dawn's eyebrows were tightly knitted with anxiety. What was she supposed to do now? It would be blatantly obvious when she goes down for breakfast tomorrow. She could not say that she was playfully slapping herself for fun in the room, right? Besides, she could not say that she had bumped into something since the wound was on her face. Dawn pouted in annoyance. She was about to look for some foundation and see if she could conceal it when she realized that she did not bring her pajamas along when she rushed in just now. Other than Jian Mose, no one would come in here, right? Oh well, Jian Mose isn't gonna come back anyway. Following that thought, Dawn wrapped herself in a feeble attempt to hide with a small towel and opened the door, silently willing for no one to enter the room. However, once she opened the bathroom door, she heard the door open as she was approaching her bed. Dawn felt like she was about to explode, so she frantically moved to the bed and tried to cover herself with her blanket. Ah! It was too late. A man walked in and immediately met Dawn's eyes. Her face was flushed red with embarrassment. In such an awkward situation, she refused to open her eyes. Who are you? You're not the daughter of Tyme. When Jian saw that the woman standing before him was not Sheena, he was engulfed in flames of anger. He strode towards Dawn. Dawn was petrified. She could not let the Tymes fall to its demise, so she frantically opened her eyes. I am genuinely the daughter of Enzo Tyme. Do you need me to do a DNA test? She was not afraid of any tests, since she was Enzo Tyme's true daughter anyway. Once she opened her eyes, her heart skipped a beat. Was this handsome man exactly the same man that had heroically rescued her from the claws of the meaty man tonight? His name is Jian Mose. The Jian Mose. Oh no. She had even told him to his face that he had a temper, was irrational, and was unpredictable. Dawn felt like the heavens were playing a prank on her. She was starting to feel helpless. Chapter 3. My girl should not be someone anyone could pay to hurt. Tell me. Who sent you? What do you want? Jian Mose pounced at Dawn Tyme, pinched her chin painfully, and jerked her head up forcefully, making her stare into his bloodthirsty eyes. Did the Tymes send a fake bride, or did you put on a show with your comrades just now so that you can abduct the daughter of Tyme? Dawn was in so much pain her forehead creased and her tears threatened to fall. She tried to speak with much difficulty. I really am a daughter of Tyme. If you don't believe me, take my blood and do a blood test with Enzo Tyme. She straightened her right arm in front of Jian, motioning him to take her blood. She was leaning on the bed, almost lying down, and Jian was towering over her. When Dawn lifted up her arm, her right shoulder was exposed before Jian, and the heart-shaped scar in it had Jian's pupils dilated and constricted immediately. He was in disbelief, and he felt the same overwhelming emotions he had imagined for 10 years. The hand that held Dawn's hand subconsciously loosened, and he yanked Dawn up just to stare intently at her right shoulder. How did you get this scar? Jian released Dawn's chin as his gaze was fixed intently on that scar. His heart was quivering. When I was young, my mum smashed broken glass on me. Dawn answered timidly, even when she was skeptical of Jian, who was extremely intrigued about her scar. When you were 5? Jian asked again. Dawn pursed her lips tightly. Was this devil really bothered about scars on a woman's body? Was it because it affected her overall beauty? 11 years ago, you'd been to Spring Stream Village and saved a boy sporting a high fever that was being chased by other people. Jian's gaze was crazed. How did you know that? Dawn was stunned as she met Jian's eyes once more. She was 8 that year. It was the first time she ran away from home after beatings from Shaban Eve. She did not dare to go home for a couple of days, so she stumbled upon Spring Stream Village in her aimless walking and bumped into a boy that was being chased by someone else. Later, she heard that he had stolen some pears for his mother, and she rescued him from it. It was a hot day, her dress was sliced open by tree branches, so her scar was as clear as day. What happened to you? Little Jian asked. My mom smashed broken glass on me when I was little. It's been 3 years, so it's okay now. Little Dawn spoke casually. That was the exact same scar on the body of this woman before him. There was something in his eyes that she did not understand. He was surprised, excited, and sick with longing. His mouth was subtly twitching. It felt like his entire being was shuddering, like a sudden explosion of an emotion that he had buried for a long time. Almost immediately, Jian pulled her into his arms and hugged her so tightly it was as if he wanted to bury her deep inside his marrow and never letting her go. The moon in the sea was the same moon in the sky. The woman before her was the same woman he kept in his heart. I finally found you. I've finally found you. Dawn was still naked, and she was dumbfounded from all the odd feelings Jian was displaying. Even though he may be her husband, this was the first time they had met, and Dawn was still nervous and shy about it. Ouch, pain. Jian was too strong. His hug felt like it was about to snap her arms into two, hence the painful yelp. The word pain got Jian to reel back all his overwhelmed emotions immediately. He released her quickly as he asked with concern and worry. Pain where? He checked her entire body thoroughly, and his gaze landed on her swollen, slapped cheek. He felt his heart break as he reached out, trying to caress her, but afraid that it would hurt her. His hand was outstretched in mid-air, but in a blink, he dug out his phone and called Jean. Find that group of people and teach them a painful lesson. Which group? Jian's forces had leaned towards serenity these few years, and it had been a while since they used violence to solve problems. It had been a long while since Jean had heard Jian use such harsh and venomous tone, so that took him by surprise. The group of people that harassed my wife. Wife. Before Jean could finish his sentence, Jian hung up on him. Jean stared bewilderedly at his phone. Which wife? Wait, could the woman we rescued tonight be? Now that Jian realized the girl he had been pining for the past 11 years was nearly molested tonight, the buried bloodlust in him was awakened and burning hot. His girl. How audacious of them. They were only doing what they've been paid to do. You don't have to overreact. Dawn certainly did not want bloodshed to happen because of her. Jian tenderly caressed her petite face as he declared with irrefutable malice. My girl should not be someone anyone could pay to hurt. He pulled her into his arms again and swore. If you had been hurt tonight, all must die. Dawn was frightened by his solemnness and rage. A chill ran down her spine as she thought, he was a tyrant, just like the rumors had said it. If he finds out that I'm really just a replacement, the Tymes. She realized that he recognized that she was not Sheena. That's true, she thought, who would be able to fool Jian Mose? You don't care who I am anymore. Dawn thought that since he had realized something, so it was better if she put it out in the open. I would like to thank the Tymes for letting you marry me instead. Are you not gonna ask me why I was out tonight, and why I was near a bar? Dawn thought that it was better for her to state the obvious. Not gonna ask. I only want you. Jian pulled her in a tighter embrace. Now that you have me, you can do whatever you want. Anything you want. I will protect you as long as you're with me. His magnetic voice uttered words that moved her. No one has ever said that they would protect her. She grew up with scolding and beatings from the one she cared for most. Aren't you worried that someone had sent me to harm you? I'd die happy in your hands, even if it kills me. His words were firm and serious, tempting her walled-up heart to open up once again. Could she trust the man before her? At least for now, the Tymes did not have to worry about him finding out that she was a mere replacement. Can you let me go for now? I can't breathe. Dawn was nearly out of breath from his hug. She stuttered awkwardly. Let me first put some clothes on. It was only now that Jian realized that his girl was still naked in his arms. He opened his arms slowly to see her fair, succulent skin, and the face delectably flushed from his hug. His gaze fell on the pair of perky bunnies before him, and his usually aloof eyes turned red as desire dyed his face. Dawn, who was still clueless about the transformation, was still getting dressed. As she was about to button her shirt, a black shadow loomed over her. Her shirt was immediately torn open as a hand held her head closely against his. Chapter 4. Dumb Luck. Dawn had her breath stolen from her. Her twinkling eyes were stunned. This was something she had never experienced before. She wanted to catch her breath, so as she opened her mouth to breathe, Jian Mo sneaked his way in and cascaded his love firmly on her, leaving no space to hide, and no allowance to leave. Jian launched on her with strong, intense feelings like he wanted to make up for everything that he had missed the past 10 years. The desire that was suppressed for her for the past 10 years had finally found its home, and she was finally in his arms to take in all of it. If he knew she was the replacement, he would not let her be alone on their wedding night. Dawn was nervous, so she rejected him. May I? Dawn had no idea how she fell asleep. When the first rays of the sun shone into her room, Dawn, who was exhausted, lifted up her arms in a daze and tried to cover her eyes. Her delicate brows creased as she turned over. Jian, who did not sleep the entire night from his overwhelming emotions, noticed it and reached out for the curtain remote control. A black curtain descended from the roof, and soon after, there was not a trace of light in that room. His girl's tight-knit brows were finally at ease as she continued her sleep. In her turn, Dawn subconsciously wrapped her arms around Jian's waist. That morning, this innocent, little act had ignited a dazzling smile on the usually cold-faced man. He tried his best to be gentle in their first time, but his longing was too strong, and his girl was too enticing, so he accidentally went overboard. After tucking her in, Jian got up and left the room. In the dining area, Jean and Sean, who have waited for a long time, did not dare to move their fort. Jian was a wayward son of an aristocratic family in Metropolis. His mother had him out of wedlock, and she was chased out by the Moses, and nearly died as the Moses refused to show them mercy. Jean and Sean were there with Jian as they lived dangerously, surviving day by day. Even as they looked like Jian's subordinates, they were more like brothers, and that was why they ate at the same table with him. Why did you think Sarmo slept in today? He was normally done with breakfast and on his way to work by now. Jean stared pitifully at the stairs, waiting for Jian to appear while his stomach growled a few times. You can knock on his door and ask him? Sean secretly dug a hole for Sean to jump into. Nonsense, where would he get the guts from to knock and interrupt? Jean rolled his eyes in disdain at Sean. Why are you still daydreaming? Let's eat. Jian waltzed into the dining area and said light-heartedly. He seems to be in a very good mood. That was one sentence that had redeemed and delivered Sean in Jean's bellies. Right, there's new news that came regarding the girl you wanted to find. However, I don't think any of them are it. Jean reported as they ate. I found her. When Jian announced it, a subtle smile flashed across Jian's lips. What? Really? Where? Sean was shocked. He was so eager to meet the girl that had their sermos pinned for more than 10 years. How attractive must the girl be if there was not one day in the past 10 years that he was not looking for her? On my bed. Jian nonchalantly replied to him, only for Jean to spit out the milk he was drinking. Pfft, sorry. Jean wiped his mouth with a napkin. Sean frowned and looked at Jian in disbelief. The daughter of Time. No way, what a coincidence. Jian's mouth was usually faster than his brain. Dumb luck is really a thing? Jian lifted up his eyes and glared menacingly at Jean. His anger was so evident he placed his fork on the table. Who are you calling dumb? Jian's tone was eerily cold. How dare he call his girl dumb? Ha! Ha ha! Don't be angry, Sir Mose. Jean did a mode switch into a waggling puppy. What I meant was, how lucky for you to stumble upon her. Do we need to call her down to join us? Jean switched the topic immediately. No need, she had it hard last night. Jian was once again saying something that would make anyone blush with the casual, carefree tone. Sean, who was at the side, pushed his glasses up his nose bridge. Do you want to have her checked? No, I'm not interested in her past. Since the past has passed, I'll make it up to her in the future with my life. I'll let her tell me herself. Jian rose up from his seat, wiped his hands with a napkin, and ordered Sean as he left. She's a marriage replacement. Find out if she was threatened by the Tymes. He would not allow anyone to threaten his girl and give her grievance. He was not present before, but now that he was, no one was allowed to anymore. Before Jian left the house, he gave strict orders to Miss Jones. No one is allowed to disturb Madam's rest. Prepare some hot chocolate for her to drink when she gets up and make her whatever she wants to eat. Jean was astonished and was increasingly curious about Dawn after he witnessed the normally stoic Sir Mose exhibit such gentleness and care. Immediately, he turned to Sean and said, You're the one that went to the Tymes to bring Madam back, right? How's she like? Is she a matchless beauty? Jean's curiosity had killed many cats. There was a veil on her face. How am I supposed to see her clearly? Sean answered with a lazy drawl as he shrugged. I'm full. Off to work now. When Dawn was awoken by her phone ringing at around 9, the weariness and soreness enticed her to just continue sleeping. However, when she saw that it was a phone call from the Tymes, her tiredness had vanished immediately when she picked up the call. Dawnie, how's it like being with Jian? Did he mistreat you? Enzo Tymes' worried and saddened voice rang in her ears. Can you come home to visit today? Is today a good time for you? Enzo Tyme was Dawn's biological father. All the limited love she had growing up was from Enzo and Nancy, who had never treated Xiaoban's family like they were servants. When Dawn was beaten or scolded by Xiaoban when she was little, Enzo and Nancy were the ones that came out to be peacemakers. This was also why Enzo was filled with grief and guilt when Dawn offered to replace their so-called daughter in marriage with Jian. However, he was at wit's end since Jian had promised to gift the Mona Lisa, which was supposed to be a Time family heirloom but went missing in Enzo's father's generation back to the Tymes. So, for the legacy of the Time family, he had no other choice. Chapter 5. As long as you say it, I'd go to the ends of the world with you. The Time family was a family of scholars that held great regard for etiquette and culture. Enzo Tyme was furious at Jian Mose for not showing up at the wedding, so he was hoping that when Dawn Tyme was due for her first visit home as a married woman, she would be allowed to. He would only be able to feel less guilty if he saw that Dawn was able to be carefree by Jian's side. Still calling me Mr. Tyme? Enzo prompted kindly. Father. That simple word had Dawn holding back her tears. She was overwhelmed by 1,000 different emotions in her heart, but she was happy. She had been calling the wrong people mother and father for more than 10 years now, and this time, it was finally right. After she hung up the phone, Dawn felt conflicted. She struggled for a very long before mustering enough courage to call Jian. You there? Jian picked up her call in a split second, but he did not hear her voice. As he was sorting through different documents, he frowned. He anxiously placed his pen on the table. Did something happen to his girl again? Whatcha doing? Dawn was stuttering. Sorting through some documents. Jian answered her truthfully without second thoughts. Oh, I'll leave you to work then. Just carry on with your work? Okay. I was just wondering. Dawn hung up immediately after that. Her first visit home as a married woman should involve both of them, but since Jian did not even show up during their wedding day, visiting home with her was out of the question. The things he said yesterday might be moving and filled with intense emotions, but it was a man's lies, even though his mouth did allow her to. Dawn's ears were flushed and hot. She stopped her daydreaming right away. How do I ask Jian to go home with me? Dawn was frustrated and tired as she pulled at her hair. She got out of bed to wash up. When she was dressed and was contemplating her course of action, the door opened. Why are you back? Dawn looked at the anxious-looking, flustered Jian who looked like he came home in a mad dash. I felt like you needed something, so I came rushing back after I hung up the phone. Jian took big strides towards her and held her shoulder. He scanned her thoroughly and asked, "Are you okay? Does it hurt anywhere?" Worry and concern colored his face, and the sincerity on his face felt very surreal to Dawn. No one had ever shown her any concern like this before. It was like he was terrified that she would be hurt, or sad at the slightest trigger. Nothing's hurting. I just want you to visit the Tymes with me. Jian's sincerity and obvious fondness for her gave her courage to be honest with him. She muttered under her breath, I'm asked to go home today for my first visit as a married woman. I don't know if you'd want to go with me. I don't know if you have time. It's my bad. I should have initiated it. Jian sighed in relief as soon as he knew that Dawn did not feel unwell. He said to her tenderly, We can go now, it's not too late yet. You've agreed? Dawn was in disbelief. This Jian was not as heartless, vicious, and unpredictable as the rumors had it. Silly girl. Jian pulled Dawn into a hug. His eyes were filled with love and tenderness. As long as you tell me, I'd go to the ends of the world with you. Dawn Tyme, Jian most solemnly vow, from today onwards, as long as you want it, I'll comply. He lowered his voice carefully and helplessly. You don't have to be so restrained with me. Jian could tell that his girl was a little scared of him. It was fine, they would have a whole lifetime together for them to learn how to love each other. Dawn had Jian drive a modest, ordinary car to the Tymes. A flashy, limited edition sports car parking at the Tymes front door would have garnered unwanted attention. The Tymes did not want to be greatly associated with Jian Mose, just like how good kids would not want to be associated with the mean girls at school. Jian did not have a good impression with the Tymes, so when they knew that Jian did not organize a wedding ceremony and he did not tell anyone about the wedding, they were elated. You can just ask me for whatever you want. Dawn peeked at Jian several times and looked like she had something to say before she lowered her head. Finally, after the third time, Jian could not take it anymore. A sliver of nervousness flashed through Dawn's heart when it felt like she was granted special immunity. Do you have feelings for me? Right after being recognized, Dawn had seen how gentle Jian was to her. Rumors had it that he was despicable and wretched, but he was nothing but lovingly gentle to her, and he would even say yes to anything she wanted. She may not be experienced in the relationship department, but what else could it be, other than feelings of love, that would make a total stranger treat another stranger so lovingly? Dawn did not expect anything from this marriage to begin with, since it was merely a chance to repay the Tymes for their kindness towards her. However, when she had heard words that moved her and the eyes that enticed her, she felt like she was beginning to feel a certain degree of wanting towards him. Jian was ecstatic when he heard her question. Were her eyes finally opened? Was she not afraid of him anymore? He was quick to express his feelings. I love you more than life itself. If so, how could you still marry a daughter of Time before knowing it was me? Dawn asked solemnly as she lifted her eyes to look at him. How are you so sure that if you found me after you got married to someone else, that I would gladly be your mistress or your underground lover? Cough cough. Sean, who was driving silently in front, choked on his saliva as he listened to Dawn's soul-searching questions. He composed himself immediately and tried to reduce his presence since he was afraid that Jian would pull him out to be cannon fodder. Jian glanced at Sean, then he looked at Dawn's hopeful face and told her the truth. I had no intention of marrying any daughter of Time. The Times are merely a partnership program for my company to expand its territories. I will not have another woman after I've found you. For now, Jian did not want to tell Dawn why he asked the Times for a hand in marriage. He did not want to tell her the hard and complicated things. All he wanted was for her to stay carefree by his side. Dawn saw the flash of killing intent in Jian's eyes towards the end of his reply and tallied it with all the rumors that were said of him and suddenly felt a coldness in her back, but at the same time, she was a little joyful deep down in her heart. So lack of good conscience causes you to dismiss Liv so easily. Dawn muttered under her breath. You will reap what you sow one day. Jian caught the flash of joy in her eyes, and he could not help but subtly smile. He pulled her into his arms and his husky, deep voice rang from the top of her head. Good conscience. It's a good thing to have. Too bad, you don't have it. Chapter 6. This is a bewitching smile. You've gotta smile normally. They have finally reached the Times. Sean had parked the car. Jian, later when we go in, you've gotta smile more. Don't be emotionless, okay? Dawn Tyme was so nervous. It felt like she had gotten herself a gangster boyfriend, and was terrified at the thought of her parents not liking him when they would meet, and that they would think that she was mistreated. Okay. Even though Jian Mose did not want to sell himself out by smiling, but his heartthrob had spoken, and had called him by name. Jian Mose, oh, Jian Mose. You're done for this life. She had merely called him by name, and it had rendered his heart into a pool of goo. Do you want to smile for me so I can check? Dawn was not at ease, so she asked for a rehearsal. Sean, who was at the side, was tickled by Dawn, but he had to hold in his laughter, not daring to make a sound. Jian looked at the petite woman before him who had her face scrunched up with worry, and he wanted to prank her a little. He suddenly took a step toward her and lifted her chin up for her to meet his love-filled eyes, as an enticing smile bloomed on his bewitchingly handsome face. Like this. Dawn pushed his hand away as she felt flustered. She turned around and avoided his penetrative gaze, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. This is a bewitching smile. You've gotta smile normally. Dawn sighed. It's fine, let's just go in. Okay. I'm here, you don't have to worry about anything. Dawn's come-home party was quite a rowdy one. Not sure if it was to thank Dawn for the bride replacement, or to take into account Jian's devilish traits, but everyone in the Time family was present at Enzo Time's villa. It shouldn't matter how Dawn was like before since she saved us Times. After missing the family heirloom for hundreds of years, it was finally found, and it was all thanks to Dawn. Enzo was seated at the dining table as he made things clear in a heartfelt manner. This will be her home from now on. When she's back, we must let her experience the warmth of a family and not give her snarky comments or cold shoulders. The Times, being the noble and virtuous family that they were, refused to bow down to Jian just because he had forced their hand in marriage. Jian's forte was in the business world, while the Times were reputable literati. Jian may induce fear in whoever that heard his name, but the Times, who have steered clear of his path, had nothing to be afraid of. All they were after was the gift that Jian would give them in exchange. Grandpa Time agreed with what Enzo had to say and added with a cough. Her first coming home party is something that's of importance. Even so, it couldn't diminish the fact that she didn't make it back to save Mommy. Sheena Time, Time's family's eldest daughter, lowered her head and muttered with resentment. Sheenie, your sister took your place in this marriage for you. She's literally going through hell for you. Enzo reprimanded his daughter. Don't exaggerate. Grandma Time saw her precious granddaughter get reprimanded and came to her rescue as she smacked Enzo lightly on his shoulders. Dawn might just have a plan of her own when she said yes. Mama Shaban had taught her many things since she was little, but what's the use of that? She's still gallivanting all the time. Even though this time, she was said to be doing it all for me, but she also asked to be legally adopted into the Time family, which basically turns her from pauper to princess. How is she at loss here? Mom, what pauper to princess? I've never thought of her and her family as servants. When Sheena, who was at the side, heard the term from pauper to princess. Her heart quivered, as if someone had prodded her deeply guarded secret. "Father, we're back." Dawn trod happily towards Enzo with a smile on her face. She was at the door when she overheard the entire conversation. She was grateful to Enzo for speaking up for her, but she did not blame Grandpa and Grandma for not liking her. Even though they may be blood-related, they had not spent time together before, so no one knew about that. In their eyes, the Dawn they knew was the Dawn that Xiaoban had remonger to the rest of the world. It was normal for these two elder lies to not develop a liking toward her based on Tyme family tradition. Dawn glanced mockingly at Grandpa, Grandma, Uncle, and Aunt Tyme while greeting them politely. Enzo got up lovingly to meet Dawn. He held her hands endearingly while checking her thoroughly to make sure she was not hurt. All the others had their gaze fixed on Jian Mose, who was trailing behind Dawn. Jian was rarely seen in public. He was always in the background. Sean was mostly the public face of the company. On the other hand, Jean was in charge of the Unthinkables while only a handful of people have seen Jian Mose in person, hence he mostly existed in rumors regarding him. Was this man really the devil with blood-stained hands, bad temper, and bloodlust? Jian's hair was clean and sleek. He wore a casual-looking tracksuit that Dawn had specially chosen for him because she complained that he looked too serious in a suit. His build was lanky, his silhouette was bold, his features were perfect, and his eyes were dark and deep. He gave everyone a normal polite smile, and just one glance at him would get people hooked. His eyes, who were filled with undeniable fondness, never left Dawn, not even for a second. What happened to the rumored ferocious, ruthless demon? Sheena was shocked, dumbfounded, and beyond regret at that moment. What kind of gem did she miss out on? She stood up subconsciously and made her way towards Jian. The others were equally awestruck. "Oh yeah, I brought all of you presents." Dawn looked at Grandpa and Grandma jovially and added, "Everyone is included." As soon as she opened her mouth, Jian had already started handing out the gifts that Dawn had prepared in perfect synchronization. There was no need for Dawn to prep him beforehand. This heartwarming scene caused Sheena to flare in jealousy. All of these were supposed to be her glory. No wonder Dawn was so kind-hearted and volunteered to replace her in that marriage. It was all part of her plan. This witch, how despicable and shameless could she be to volunteer herself in anything that involved a male? Hatred welled up within Sheena as she glared at Dawn. She would skin her alive if she would, especially that face of her. The heavens were unfair for making that witch look as exquisite as she did. Sheena's gaze paused on Dawn's face, and she had a realization. Why did Dawn's face look like she had been slapped? Even though Dawn had tried to conceal it with foundation, it was still obvious to her, and she was elated. That must be Jian's doing. Sheena happily started to find fault with Dawn's appearance. It seemed like there was a bruise below her collarbone too, just that she could not see it clearly. Her gaze trailed downward until she reached Dawn's slightly sore knees, and joy filled her heart. Jian must have found out that Dawn loved going out at night and was often never home because she was out gallivanting, and punished her to kneel while he slapped her. The more she thought of it, the happier she got. Only blue bloods like her could match such a handsome gem. Not unworthy Dawn. When the party started, Jian took up the initiative to propose a toast to Grandpa and Grandma Tyme. At that moment, he was there as a junior with Dawn. After a round of exchanging pleasantries. "Cheers to you, sissy. I have not had the chance to congratulate you on your new marriage." Sheena stood up abruptly and raised a toast to Dawn with the glass of juice in her left hand. Dawn had just noticed that Sheena's right arm was bandaged from her fingers all the way up till the length of her arm. A cunning gleam flashed in Dawn's eyes. "Thanks." Dawn stood up and raised her glass as she smiled bashfully. Chapter 7. No one is allowed to make you feel small, not even with words. "I'll propose a toast for you, sissy, but there are some things that I want to remind you as your sister." Sheena Tyme tucked her hair flirtatiously behind her ear. Her mannerisms were extremely coy. Even though she said that she was reminding Dawn, but she was staring intently at Jian Mose the whole time. Then, she proceeded to speak in a coquettish and feigned innocent tone. Now that you're a married woman, sissy, you can't be running away from home and not coming back whenever you like how you were before. If we gallivant outside with different men, we girls are the ones that are at loss. Do you remember when you called me crying in the middle of the night telling me that you've been bullied by a few men? I've told you before that you'd better not hang out with them anymore, but you refused to listen to me. Look at me, even though I don't go anywhere else other than school and come home, and it may seem boring, but I think this is the composure a girl's supposed to have. Sheena's storytelling skills were superb. Her intonations were perfect, and her eyes never left Jian's face. She was repeatedly mentioning how disgusting Dawn was, and how prim and proper she was. When did I ever call you? Dawn immediately lifted her eyes, swept at Sheena, and got up to defend herself. She could not do anything about Sheena's regular rumor-mongering behind her back, and she could not be bothered about it. How dare she speak it blatantly to her face? She was just about to retaliate when Jian tugged her hand, gesturing for her to sit down. He passed her some bread from the breadbasket. His actions were filled with tenderness, but as he casually glanced at Sheena, that one look sent shivers down Sheena's spine. Ms. Tyme, are you questioning my taste, or insulting my choice? Why do you feel the need to comment about my wife? Jian spoke nonchalantly while subtly glancing at Dawn to reassure her. Besides, have you seen the men you claim that she's been gallivanting with? Or even better, do you know them? No matter if you've seen them, or if you do know them, it proves that you would also frequent those places, Miss Tyme. Why the need to act all prim and proper? If you're just fabricating lies, then all I have to say about Tyme family's upbringing is. Jian's gaze flickered towards Grandpa Tyme and scoffed in disdain. Duly noted. With him around, no one is allowed to make her feel small, not even with words. That freshly unfolded scene shocked Sean, who was invited by Grandpa Tyme to join them at the table to his core. This was probably the first time he had heard his sermons blubbering nonsense with someone else for such a long period of time. Last time, if someone were to speak like that at the dining table, Jian would not even waste his energy in retaliating. He would just sip a mouthful of wine, then order Jean to discreetly take care of them. Was this the good conscience Sir Mose had found after Dawn complained about his lack of good conscience? Did you have to say such hurtful words, Mr. Mose? Sheena flew into a rage from shame. No one has ever said anything like this to her before. How could she swallow such a dreadful accusation when she was trained from a young age to be the perfect sophisticated lady? So what if you're hurt? Jian glanced at her icily, his expressions indifferent. That glance made Sheena skip a beat. How dare Jian defend that which called Dawn without any plausible reasoning? All these should have belonged to her. She was supposed to be the one that was endearingly held in the palm of everyone's hands. With Jian Mose pampering her, she did not even need the title of eldest daughter of the Tyme family. Dawn had taken all these from her, and she has got to snatch them back. How audacious of Dawn! She was nothing but a despicable little witch that have learned shameless ways to entice men. Mr. Mose, frankly, I'm supposed to be your bride. I'm the true daughter of Tyme. Sheena seemed to have forgotten everything else as she pointed at Dawn exasperatedly. It's her fault. She had used shameless, abominable ways to deceive me. I am the one that you wanted to marry. Sit down. At that moment, Grandpa Tyme, who was usually dignified and composed, slammed his walking stick loudly onto the ground, scaring every other Tyme. Enzo, this is your amazing daughter. Grandpa Tyme was staring daggers at Sheena. What happened to your good manners and to being considerate? All gone after a cup of wine. What nonsense are you spewing? It may look like he was rebuking her, but he was actually coming to her aid by changing the topic since they did not dare to let it on to Jian about the whole bride replacement fiasco. Please excuse this granddaughter of mine, Mr. Mose. She's so bad with alcohol. She doesn't really drink usually, and she was elated that you guys are back, so she started spewing nonsense after drinking. Please don't take it to heart, Mr. Mose. Grandpa Tyme played a good game of retreating for the sake of advancing as he wiped away Sheena's disrespectful boorishness with a chuckle. Enzo Tyme chimed in too. He's right, Mr. Mose, no offense to you. My Sheenie's gone out of control this time, I'll teach her to be better. Alas, the person that they would defend unyieldingly was still Shenna Tyme. Dawn chuckled coldly in her heart. Right, what was she even expecting? No one knew that she was the true daughter of Tyme. How could she use her knowledge to emotionally blackmail others? Jian saw the loneliness that flashed through Dawn's eyes and placed his hand around Dawn's shoulders to give her some sense of security. Don't be so tense, gentlemen. Since Dawn had married me as a daughter of Tyme, as long as she's with me, I, Jian Mose, would be on friendly terms with the Tyme family. However, if any day should my girl not want to come back to the Tyme villa, let's do our very best when we meet each other in the business world, shall we? Jian was still casually apathetic, but his underlying message was clear. He was informing them his kindness towards the Tymes was solely because of Dawn's existence. Sean had given him a full report of his findings of Dawn's life story, and the reason she married in Sheena's place. Since Dawn did not mention it, he would not expose her. However, after hearing what Jian had said, Dawn misunderstood. She thought as long as she's with me meant he was threatening her with the Tyme family, so she would not run away from him, or the Tymes would suffer the consequences of her actions. Dawn's fist balled involuntarily as she shuddered inwardly. Don't worry, Mr. Mose. Dawnie is also a beloved daughter of Tyme. Enzo spoke up. To ease the thickening tension in the atmosphere, he turned to Sheena and said, It's time for you to change your dressing on that arm, Sheena. Go do it in your room, okay? At the mention of her arm, Sheena felt increased resentment towards Dawn. This was all thanks to her. Sissy, would you go with me? Sheena looked at Dawn innocently as she pleaded. I'm sorry for not thinking before I spoke just now, Sissy, I'm really sorry. Let's have a heart-to-heart talk in my room, Sissy. Aunt Xiaoban had always been the one that has been doing the change in dressing for me, but sadly, she's gone out today. She sadly missed your coming home party. Sheena did not forget to mock Dawn towards the end. Since Xiaoban was still her mother for namesake, for a mother to not want to be at her daughter's coming home party was such a pitiful event to unfold. Sheena smirked inwardly. No one loves you, unwanted child. You're such a waste of space. Dawnie, why don't you go with Sheenie for a while? Enzo asked for Dawn's opinions carefully. Since it'll be a while until you come back next. As Enzo dwelled in the devilish traits that Jian possessed, he thought to himself, Dawn must be really constricted over there. Okay, father, whatever you say. Enzo had spoken, so Dawn would not say no. Besides, she did not think that Sheena would dare perform any tricks with so many people around. Only Jian looked at Dawn with worry in his eyes, since Sheena did not look like a good person to him. I'll be okay. Accompany Grandpa, Grandma, Father, and rest for me, okay? Dawn said all these to reassure Jian. Jian's gaze followed Dawn and Sheena all the way until they had entered Sheena's room. Chapter 8, Revealing Your True Colors. Ms. Gray, please send a bottle of water to my room. The wound will need to be washed first when the bandage is changed. When she came in, she could casually leave the door open. By that time, if anything happened downstairs, it could easily be heard too. It would be better than getting framed by Sheena. However, after Miss Gray came delivering the water, she closed the door instead. Right now, at this moment, Dawn was helping Sheena to take off the bandage. Sheena's expression turned treacherously angry all of a sudden when she saw the door was closed. Now that there's no one here, you don't have to pretend anymore. It was you who requested me to come upstairs to help you. And now you're claiming that I'm being fake. Your arm is wounded, but that doesn't mean you aren't sick in the head. Dawn did not get angry. She even felt like laughing. Stop pretending to be innocent. It was you who wounded my arm. You're just jealous of my beauty and trying to disfigure me. What a fortunate thing that even God doesn't want to help you, so only my wrist was hurt. Don't you think I don't know the password that you told me before you got married was the password that was meant to trigger the bomb? Sheena got furious and she pushed Dawn away, who was unwrapping the bandage for her. Dawn looked up calmly at her. When Aunt Nancy was urgently in need of a blood transfusion to save her life, I got knocked unconscious near the Tyme family's house. I missed the best chance. And my phone was taken away. I don't know who's trying to hurt Aunt Nancy and me. And yes, I wanted to blow up the phone. But you tell me, how did you get my phone? Don't tell me you picked it up. Dawn was knocked unconscious that day. Her phone was stolen too. She wasn't sure if it was Sheena and Xiaoban who did it. So, she purposely told Sheena a password before she got married. She cheated. She told Sheena the password to unlock the phone, but it was actually a trigger for the phone to explode. She even told her that there were some inappropriate records of her messing around out there. Who would have known that Sheena could not wait to get something on her? She set herself on fire, but she did not expect the explosion would be that great. The phone. I picked the phone up, of course. Sheena explained guiltily. In an instant, she put on a vicious and mean look. She stood up and looked at Dawn with a cold smile. My dear sister, let's say if I got hurt in front of you, will the people outside think that you did it on purpose? To take revenge on what I said to you? If they see your true colors, what would Jian think of you? She must reveal how defaced she really was in front of Jian. Dawn panicked. Before she knew it, she had just blurted out a sentence of "What are you going to do?" Then Sheena poured the water that Miss Gray sent in on her wounded wrist hurriedly. Immediately after that, she threw the bottle violently with a bam, followed by a piercing cry. Ah! Don't drag me along if you'd like to die. Dawn was so shocked that she was acting so quick and fast, dragging Sheena forcefully to the bathroom. She opened the cold water and gushed it on her burned wrist. Sheena was smiling cunningly. I'll drag you together to death when I die. If it wasn't for you, I can stay in this family with a clear conscience. If it wasn't for you, I'd be the one getting married to Jian. If it wasn't for you, Mama Nancy wouldn't have died. Sheena was frustrated. She was supposed to be the precious daughter. She was the daughter who had been staying beside Nancy, but Nancy was actually fond of that beach, Dawn. She even began to suspect that Dawn was her biological daughter. Fortunately, Nancy was unable to tell Enzo about it on time. She wanted this matter to be buried and unknown forever. The only way was to let Nancy disappear. However, even though Nancy had gone, it turned out that she had Jian Mose beside her. Why Dawn, why? Slap! Dawn raised her hand and slapped Sheena in the face. The flames of fury spread to her heart, and she was trembling with anger. What are you fussing about? You're already born in a rich family and have grown up being loved by many people around you. Mr. Tyme treated you so kindly and sincerely. What about you? What have you been thinking about for the whole day? You have no right to mention Mama Nancy. Nancy was someone in Dawn's heart that no one could reach. If it had not been Enzo spoiling Sheena, she refused to see him losing his daughter again after losing his wife. Otherwise, even if using death to pay for life, she would drag Sheena down to hell. Dawn was so furious that she lost her mind. As her eyes darkened, she crouched down her body immediately and squeezed Sheena's chin. She said harshly, I will find out about the death of Mama Nancy. It'd be best if Xiaoban and you had nothing to do with it. Otherwise, I'd dedicate my life to ruining your whole life. At this moment, what Dawn said made Sheena laugh proudly and treacherously. Dawn, you should show Jian the way. You're clenching your teeth right now. And let everyone in the Tyme family watch this. Help, Daddy, help. Suddenly, Sheena was screaming out of her lungs for help. She wanted everyone living in the Tyme family's villa to hear this. After she said that, Dawn heard noises of someone breaking the door. The next second she fell into a magnanimous and warm embrace. She looked up and met Jian's panicky eyes. He asked anxiously, What happened? Where did she hurt you? Jian broke the door. Ever since Dawn came upstairs, Jian had been paying attention to the situation in the room. When Sheena screamed for the first time, he was already leaving the dining table and rushed upstairs. However, when he dashed into the room, he saw Dawn squeezing Sheena's chin aggressively. Still, he thought that it was his girl who was getting attacked. Sheena could not believe what she saw with her own eyes, how Jian was reacting. He clearly saw that it was her who was hurt for himself. Enzo and the other family members of Tyme had just come in this time. The moment Sheena saw her father, the grievance in her heart turned into tears streaming down on her face. "Daddy, Daddy, you're finally here." Sheena got up toughly, acting all weak and painful. She leaned on Enzo's body and complained. "It was Sissy. She can just tell me if she doesn't want to help me with the wound. But she tried to harm me by making use of the excuse and helping me to change the wound dressing. I told her that the water was used to disinfect the wound, but she poured it on my hand right away. Daddy, actually I dared not to tell you that, the sudden explosion in my room, it was Sissy who did it. Before she got married, she handed me a phone and let me keep it, claiming that there were things inside that Jian couldn't know about. She even asked me to charge it on time. She pretended to tell me the password, but who knows, the password was to trigger the bomb. Luckily my life wasn't in danger, otherwise I'll be in heaven with my mother." Sheena was crying like raindrops on a pear blossom. There was a bloodstain on the wound of her wrist that had not dried up. She looked pitiful. "My poor child. It must be painful. You've suffered so much." Grandma Tyme was heartbroken. She pulled Sheena out of Enzo's embrace and into her arms to comfort her. She was truly heartbroken. Grandma Sheena delicately called her with a pitiful voice. Grandpa Tyme, who usually did not talk much, looked at Dawn with the culpable look all over his face, and let out a sigh. Even Enzo sighed at Sheena at this moment. After all, Sheena had always been a sweet child since she was young. She would usually cry for a long time over a little pain. She would never have poured hot water on herself. "Donnie, I know you felt wronged, but you shouldn't have done that to your sister." Enzo was wistful and heartbroken. "You can tell Daddy if you're holding a grudge. Sheena is still young, she might be talking straightforwardly. But it was all for your own good. How can you do this to her? You've disappointed Daddy today." "I didn't." Dawn was aggrieved. The corner of her lips was twitching uneasily. "If it wasn't you who did it, then she burned herself. There are no wounds on your body. She'd cry for a long time even if she got stung by a mosquito, such a big wound," Enzo said in a blaming tone. Enzo's relationship with Dawn was wavering and conflicting. He was one of the few that been fond of Dawn since she was young. However, his favorite was still Sheena. After all, Sheena was way more decent and generous and clever and wiser than her. The most important thing was, Nancy had an obstructed labor when she was delivering. So his love for his wife made him pamper Sheena even more. Also, that was why when Nancy found out about Dawn's parentage, she dared not to tell Enzo rashly. She wanted to wait for the right time. Chapter 9, Compared to me, who's better? Dawn looked at the scene in front of her. She felt sad all of a sudden. She had put in so much effort to fit in with the Tyme family. They were a loving family, while she was just an extra that had been tossed to the wayside. She felt sorrowful when her father started to think of her as being ruthless and hypocritical. She had been homeless during her younger years. It was Mama Nancy who gave her love and rescued her. She thought that she finally had a home and a family to call her own. However, at this moment, she could now see that her presence was not welcome here and, furthermore, there was no reason for her to intrude on the loving family. "Daddy, I don't care whether you believe me or not, but I did not pour the hot water on her. Plus, I had already lost my phone earlier when I was knocked unconscious near the house. I had no idea how or why my phone ended up in Sheena's hands." Dawn's eyes were dim and calm. "I hope one day you can discover the truth, Daddy." Then, she took hold of Jian's hand. "We're not welcomed here. Let's go." Dawn took the initiative to hold Jian's hand, which made his heart surge with excitement. He was like a child who finally received his favorite candy. Before they left, Jian said to every member of the Tyme family with his gloomy face, Today, all of you should be happy that my wife wasn't hurt. Otherwise, I would have given the Tyme family an unforgettable experience of a lifetime." When they left the Tyme family's house and got into the car, Dawn propped her hand under her chin and stared blankly at the passing scenery outside the car window. She said calmly, "Do you believe me? I really didn't scald her. I only slapped her face. I believe you." Jian pulled her into his arms and allowed her to lean on him. "Even if you did scald her, so what? She wasn't supposed to slander you." Dawn lifted her head and looked at him. This man gave her peace of mind. All of a sudden, she felt like giving him an explanation regarding the phone. She was afraid that he would actually believe that there were inappropriate video recordings inside. When he heard Dawn telling him the whole story, he felt a sense of excitement. This little cutie was finally willing to share her thoughts with him. However, in the end, his focus fell upon, "So your phone was installed with a safety protection system by your so-called big brother?" Jian's face had already darkened. Big brother, how intimate was that? She had not even addressed him that intimately before. "Yes. Previously, my mother. Shaban always looked through my phone, and she always deleted my calls and messages." Big brother was pissed off, so he installed the safety protection and anti-theft systems on the phone. There was a look of admiration in Dawn's eyes. Big brother is really good at such things. After that, Shaban never managed to look through my phone again. She kept mentioning her big brother and complimenting another man. Sean, who was driving the car, saw Jian's cold face from the rearview mirror and was worried for Dawn deep in his heart. Jian's expression was gloomy. He raised his brows. "How good is he?" Dawn thought for a moment and answered sincerely, "I don't know either." Jian refused to give up. "Compared to me?" This time, Dawn did not even think about her answer and replied right away, "How am I supposed to know when you've not competed with him before?" Jian. Sean, who was sitting in front, could already feel a shiver creeping up on him from behind. He pushed up his glasses that were sitting on the bridge of his nose anxiously. Of course, he did not dare to speak. Dawn, who did not even realize that there was something wrong, lifted her head and gave him a big grin. Her eyes were curved. "However, he's not as good looking as you are." "Ha." She was finally complimenting him, so he would just let it slide. "Was he the one who was most kind to you before I found you?" It was a long journey, but it was rare for Jian to engage in such small talk with other people. "No, my second brother was the kindest." Dawn said those words with an innocent look on her face. "There was a scar on my left shoulder that was inflamed for a long time because it had not been treated immediately. I was afraid that I would be ugly because of it, but second brother said, 'Don't worry about being ugly or whatnot. If things don't work out, I'll marry you when I grow up.'" Jian thought that engaging in the small talk today was a bad idea. He was more comfortable just sitting there and staying silent. "What made him think that he wanted to marry you?" Jian's eyes turned cold. Dawn put on a bored expression hearing his question. She carefully lifted her head to look at him timidly. "It was just a joke. We were still young back then. It's not a good joke to make." Jian refuted, leaving no room for her to say otherwise. She lowered her head quietly. This man's mind was a little strange. "Drive faster." Jian finally released his anger on the innocent Sean, who was sitting in the driver's seat. Sean let out a sigh helplessly and stepped on the accelerator. Chapter 10. Madam says you're too fierce. After leaving the Tyme household due to a disagreement, they had already wasted half a day, so Jian sent Dawn home and rushed back to the office. He did not even have a day to himself to relax. By the time he reached home later that day, it was already 11 p.m. Dawn had yet to sleep and was tossing and turning on the bed. She had been thinking about the note that had been taken from the bar where she had been knocked out that night. It stated that her blood content readings indicated that she had consumed a lethal dose of sleeping pills. She was lucky to survive. She also had her paternity test report with her, which stated that her DNA was a 99% match with Enzo Tyme. However, she knew that just a single piece of paper was insufficient to make the Tyme family acknowledge her status. When she woke up, her clothing had Xiaobon's fingerprints all over it, and Nancy's death must have had something to do with the mother and child pair as well. When she had received the paternity test report back then, she received a call from Enzo, asking for her help. It was likely that Nancy had found out the truth, but did not have time to tell anyone before being silenced. The prime suspects were Xiaobon and Sheena. "You're back." Dawn sat up and greeted Jian. Dawn said those words very warmly, but Jian was still unhappy. "Who are you talking to?" Dawn was very confused. "I'm talking to you. Is there anyone else in the room?" "You didn't say my name, so I wasn't sure who you were talking to." Jian's coquettish behavior suddenly emerged as he glanced in Dawn's direction. Dawn was left speechless. "What did you call me?" Enzo strolled to the bedside and stared at her. Dawn backed off a little to put some distance between them, and said with confusion, Jian." Jian closed his eyes helplessly before opening them again and starting to lecture her. "You joyfully call others big brother and small brother, yet when you're here with me, you only use the word you? What's up with that?" He extended his fingers to lift her chin up, his Adam's apple bobbing. "What, are we not close enough yet? You have to call me husband." As he said those words, he wanted to bring himself down on her. Dawn's ears were flushed, but the fatigue and pain from last night's madness had yet to dissipate. She quickly stopped Jian's next actions and begged silently, "It still hurts." "Then call me husband." Jian knew about her body's condition, so he did not plan to actually do anything and just wanted to toy with her. He kissed her neck, and his hot breath made Dawn's body squirm and tense up. "I can call you that, but can you promise me one thing?" Dawn opened her eyes wide to bargain with him. Jian curled his lips, the prospect of a bargain seemingly piquing his interest. "Okay, say it." Jian continued kissing her neck, and his eyes started roving around. "Hubby." Dawn said those words while blushing, before quickly following with another sentence. "I want to go to school, Metropolis best school. Can you help me with that?" "That's it." Jian was stunned, as he thought that she would request some nigh impossible feat. "Yup." Dawn curled her lips and answered, "Okay, I'll get Sean to arrange it tomorrow. What's more troublesome is that I have tried to register previously, but the school did not want to accept me." Dawn had tried many times before, but the school had never accepted her, giving her the excuse that she was too infamous and whatnot. "I'm here, so things will no longer be troublesome." After the scorching summer, the season was about to transition to the golden autumn. September's weather was slowly starting to turn cold, but no matter how troublesome it seemed to be, it was not difficult at all for Jian. Dawn would become a student at the state college on the first day of registration. "Mama Nancy, I will make sure to study well and get a good grade. I'll use my own skills to get rid of all these infamous rumors and become someone worthy of being called a daughter of the Tyme family." Dawn did not care about creating a name for herself. She just wanted to return to the Tyme family and make Enzo acknowledge her. She just wanted his recognition. Early in the morning, Jian had an important conference call, so he asked them not to wait on him for breakfast. "Little madam, since it's the first day of registration, I'll accompany you. With me around, no one in the school would dare to bully you." Jean drank some milk while messing around with Dawn. The man seemed to like joking around. He and Jian were not just superior and subordinate, but even had a brotherly relationship, so Jean dared to treat Dawn like a friend while interacting with her. "I don't need you to go with me." Dawn declined Jean's offer with a look of disdain on her face, but smiled as she looked at Sean. Her bright eyes seemed to contain starlight. "I want Sean to accompany me." "Why? Am I not good enough?" Jean felt hurt after being rejected. "You?" Dawn looked at him seriously and replied honestly after considering her words. "You look too fierce. If you don't speak, with that face of yours, it's true that no one will dare to bully me. However, because of you, I will be singled out, and no one will approach me either. Sean is different, he looks gentle, graceful and gentlemanly, which will leave others with a good impression. Him, gentle? Jean spoke mockingly. Between the two of them, Jean was more talkative and joked around more. He was more gentlemanly, but lost because of his resting beach face. He just did not look as graceful as Sean, who was actually a more cruel person, almost as fearsome as Jean. He still looks more gentle than you do. Dawn cut straight to the point and looked at him with her chin down, showing her disdain. Jean did not get angry, but his face sported an eerie smile. He came closer to Dawn and started mocking her. Hey, saying I'm fierce? That man in your house might not look as fierce as I do, but his aura is enough to make people stay 10 meters away from him. Yet you've slept with him for so many months, and I don't see you rejecting him at all. Dawn stared at Jean with an angry face. Was it really the same? Could she reject Jean? The Tyme family's heirloom was still in his hands. If she did not serve him well and was returned without the hiring fee of the Mona Lisa with her, she would be deemed the sinner of the Tyme family. She dared to reject anyone other than Jean. You won't even shut your mouth while eating? Dawn jammed a piece of bread into Jean's mouth and mumbled. Seriously, picking at her scars. What rejection? Who's rejecting what? Jean, who just came from upstairs, did not hear Dawn's mumbling and only heard Jean saying something about rejecting, so he frowned. Was it some company that wanted to reject them? Jean saw Jean frowning and had a gloomy face as he walked over. He quickly reported. Your madam says you look too fierce. Chapter 11, The ones who dare badmouth my people, exile yourselves to Africa. I didn't. Dawn jumped up slightly as she tried to explain herself. The astonishment in her expression also revealed some shyness about having been caught red-handed. Pursing her lips tightly, she did not dare look directly at Jean. This aggrieved and helpless appearance was very different from how she had looked while arguing with Jean. This made Jean amused, and he continued to expose Dawn's actions. Sir Mose, your wife is such a two-faced person. She's trying to act cute now, but she was super fierce earlier when she was insulting me. Jean looked at the nervousness and timidity in Dawn's eyes, and it made him feel a little upset. It had been almost 3 months since he found her, and she had never objected to anything he had ever said. He did not like seeing her this way. He wanted her to be able to relax in front of him and do whatever she wanted. He felt a little melancholy as he helplessly raised his hand to caress her hair. He then sat down with his arm around her and fed her some milk. As he did that, he glanced casually at Jean and then at the person in his arms. He asked lightly, why? Did she hurt you? Jean thought Jean was going to stand up for him, so he immediately nodded. Yes, yes. I don't think it hurts thoroughly enough, Jean said. The emergency meeting just received cooperation from the African side. You can go over to follow up then. What? Jean was dumbfounded and aggrieved. Sir Mose, you're being completely irrational in defending your wife about this. Sean, who was on the sidelines, could not help himself from chuckling. He shook his head, kindly picked up a piece of the beef he had cut, and put it in Jean's bowl. You should eat more now, God knows what kind of food you'll get over there. Looking at how helpless and hesitant Jean was, Dawn could not help but laugh at him. Jean got to look at the smile for a long moment, and it was the most beautiful scenery he had seen that entire morning. Jean had initially said that he would personally take her to school and greet the management there before handing her over into their care. However, Dawn had rejected this offer. Dawn did not want to be too ostentatious, she just wanted to study hard. She seldom denied him anything or truly spoke her mind, so Jean could only arrange for Sean to send her to the registration instead. State College was a century-old college, and the college with the most cultural heritage in Metropolis. The students accepted into the school were either rich, famous, or among the top students in town. Enzo was a cultural tutor specially hired by the school, but he rarely stayed on its grounds. Sean left the school after straightening out all the formalities. Dawn had first asked to live on campus, but that was completely rejected by Jian. It was obviously impossible for her to stay on campus. It had taken him 10 years to find her, so he would never let her stay somewhere else. Besides, with her current attitude toward him, she would probably only go back home once per semester. He would never be able to endure such a thing. When she was on her way to collect her military uniform, she ran into Enzo, who was accompanied by Sheena. After what had happened that day, Dawn did not know what to say to them, so she thought about leaving and pretending that she had not seen them. However, just before she managed to leave, Enzo's voice rang out from behind her. "Donnie, why are you leaving just after running into us?" Enzo had a complex expression on his face. "Are you still angry with your father?" "I shall apologize to you then. I was a little impatient back then." After that day, Enzo had hurried overboard to give a speech and had just come back the day before yesterday. He had been thinking about contacting Dawn but was just too busy and had forgotten about it. Since Enzo had spoken in such a manner, Dawn did not want things to be awkward, so she gave them a polite smile. "I'm not angry anymore. Are you here to help Lilsis register?" "I was just about to go collect my uniform." "Yes, father came back here to accompany me to registration." Sheena held Enzo's arm coquettishly as she glanced at the lonely Dawn with no one by her side. She mockingly asked, "Big sis, did you come alone? Did Jian Mo send anyone to follow you here?" Looking at her pretentious appearance, Dawn rolled her eyes. She then looked at Enzo with a polite smile. "The queue has already started over there. Father, if there's nothing else, I'll head over now. I really don't want to talk to her at all." Before Enzo could agree, Dawn had nodded and left with a smile, going to line up. Since she had not managed to ridicule Dawn, Sheena grabbed the corners of Enzo's clothes with displeasure and complained. "Father, look at her. She left without waiting for you to reply to her. That's really rude. I don't even know how she managed to get accepted by the college. She hasn't been to school much. Will she embarrass the Tyme family during exams?" Enzo was also a little confused. Why does she suddenly want to attend school? I remember mentioning this to Xiaoban before, but she said Dawn did not want to go to school, so the matter was delayed. Could it be that Jian dislikes her for her lack of culture and is afraid of her embarrassing him? "Sheeny, no matter what, Dawn is one of the Tymes. Although outsiders don't know about it, our family should still help her. If she doesn't understand something in school, you should tutor her about it. Since she's already here, she must cherish her studies." Sheena had grown up in the Tyme family. To say the very least, her studies were really excellent. She had participated in various international cultural exchanges and had won many awards. Her behavior was extremely generous and seemly. Of course, she did easily explode whenever she saw Dawn. Either way, it was no wonder why the two elders of the Tyme family and Enzo really liked this child. "Okay, father, don't worry. Sheeny will definitely help my big sis." Sheena assured Enzo with a well-behaved and gentle smile, but her heart was full of disdain and contempt. What the hell, she's obviously met with every institution of higher education and explained her old bad habits and irregular behavior. How could the school still recruit her? Unfortunately, they were both assigned to the same military training team and to the same class. Sheena felt extremely disgusted. After receiving her military uniform, Sheena sent Enzo away under everyone's gaze. Enzo's name appeared in many literary newspapers, which was not something common amongst rich businessmen. Many students were excited to see him in person, and they began chattering about it endlessly. "Look, is that Mr. Enzo Tyme? He's so different from my dad and other people. They're so uncultured compared to him. Yes, in my heart he's a contemporary Shakespeare. Living around him must mean living in a world full of poetry. Yeah, I really envy the people around him. Something as valuable as that can't be exchanged for any amount of money." It continued. The discussion naturally rose and fell. Of course, Sheena was very happy to hear them speak about Enzo that way. She intentionally shouted at his back during his departure, "Father, stay safe." She sounded upstanding and generous, gentle yet considerate. Under the envious gaze of the crowd, Sheena was acting like a proud peacock. She had a triumphant face on, but when she saw Dawn's indifferent expression as she walked toward her with her uniform, all of Sheena's excitement went down the drain. Everyone is envious of me. Why is she trying to act prestigious? Why is she forcing the Tymes to recognize her identity then? How disgusting. Chapter 12. Giving the beach a taste of her own medicine. Dawn, what a coincidence. We're in the same class. Sheena stepped forward and cleverly blocked Dawn's path. Her voice was gentle and kind, but it was obviously all just an act. She then purposely raised her voice by a few decibels. "Father said you'd never been to school before, so we have no idea how you got accepted into state college. He also explained that this school is a sacred place, so you'd better not bring any bad culture into here. Father also mentioned that I should teach you more in school, and I am more than willing to do so." As soon as that remark came out of her mouth, Sheena triumphantly noticed everyone erupt into discussion around her. Dang, are you kidding? How can someone who has never gone to school attend here? When did the standard of state college get so low? Yeah, look at that girl. She doesn't have any branded clothes on her. She has a very well-developed body and looks nothing like us other girls who have just become women. And that flirtatious face of hers. Could she be the hidden mistress of some rich man? Hey, it's possible. I often listen to my brothers talking about men and women. Many girls who look good are often kept as mistresses. Maybe she thinks that she's too uncultured, so she's here to get a diploma so she can fetch a higher price for herself from those men in the future. Compared to Mr. Enzo Tymes' daughter, one is innocent and pure whereas the other is seductive. Then again, people would always believe whatever they were willing to believe, especially those with some prestige. They would always want their words to be acknowledged. Just like now, although Dawn had not said anything yet, she was already getting belittled by everyone and painted out to be a heinous person, while Sheena was seen as her opposite. Dawn felt disdainful in her heart, but she did not want to cause any trouble. She only raised her eyes lightly and glanced at Sheena before walking straight past her, thinking that she was just a dog barking around her. She stayed unbothered as she knew Sheena was expecting her to get angry and yell like a lunatic. When Sheena saw how disdainful Dawn was and how she was leaving, seemingly unaffected, she knew it would make her look like a jumping clown doing tricks on the balance beam and clamoring around an unwilling audience member. How could I bear such a humiliating fate? No one has dared to ignore me ever since I was young. Sheena got desperate. As their shoulders were just about to pass by each other, she tugged on Dawn's arm. Dawn paused for a second before she fell to the ground with a hint of cunning in her eyes. She then innocently said, "Hey classmate, I don't know how I've offended you. I was just passing by after collecting my military uniform, and I haven't had any verbal or physical conflict with you. Why did you speak to me so viciously and deliberately knock me down?" The corners of Dawn's timid mouth twitched with anxiety. "I've always heard that Mr. Enzo Tyme is a role model for the literati, but you. The difference between you and him is more than just your bloodline. I know you have a prestigious background, but I'm just here to learn, and I've never provoked you." Dawn was full of innocence, but there was a touch of humiliation hidden behind her eyes as a trace of playfulness flashed through her almond orbs. "Huff, I never wanted to have to deal with you. But since you started this, you shall get a taste of your own medicine." Dawn's unexpected actions made Sheena's eyes widen in astonishment. She could not counterattack as she did not even know how to react right then. The crowd immediately came over. Yeah, this girl really seems to have just been passing by. She didn't even say anything. Hey. The girl was so scared she was about to cry. How pitiful. More comments came. After hearing the words of the crowd, Sheena came back to her senses. As she was just about to explain, she realized that Dawn had already left, joy painted all over her face. Sheena was astonished. The embarked military training officially began in the afternoon. A simple pre-training ceremony was held on the field. Although the hot summer had passed, the sun was still slightly scorching after 2 o'clock. The principal was giving a speech on the high platform now, and the chief instructor of the military training just explained the precautions and rules of military training beforehand. The students in the audience had long grown impatient and had their heads down. The ceremony was drawing to a close, and everyone was about to be dismissed. Suddenly, the dean of the new students came to stand at the front of Dawn's team. He looked around among the students and asked, "Is there a Dawn Tyme in our team? You have a few outstanding documents that need to be submitted. Please go to the database room on the 3rd floor to complete them, now." As soon as the dean's voice pierced the air, Dawn stood up and immediately responded, "I am Dawn Tyme. I'll be there immediately." Dawn immediately left the venue and walked to the building the database room was in. She deliberately looked the building up and down, her heart distressed. Sean's work should be efficient and perfect. And Shino was just exposing my educational qualifications in front of everyone. Could this just be a coincidence? Dawn arrived at the 3rd floor suspiciously. There was literally no one on the entire floor, and a panic arose in her heart. The database room was at the end of the corridor, and the closer she got, the heavier her steps became. She looked back from time to time to check if there was anyone around, until she finally reached the database room. She was met with nothing but a shut door, so Dawn pursed her lips and knocked on the door with her trembling hand. "Knock, knock. Teacher, are you there?" Dawn asked, her tone still suspicious. 1 second, 2 seconds. More than 10 seconds passed, and there was no response at all. She felt a gloom spread all over her body. She wanted to knock again. If she still did not get a response, she would leave as she could not put herself in danger and trouble Jian. Thinking of this, she looked at the empty corridor again, took in a sighing breath, and gathered up the courage to raise her hand again to knock on the door. However, the moment her fist fell on the door again, the door suddenly opened. A pair of powerful hands rushed forth from the inside, and she was quickly dragged in. You. A cold pair of lips covered her, filling her with horror and disturbing her heart. Her entire body was tightly pressed against the door. She dared not open her eyes and struggled with all her might, even stretching her hand to the side of her waist. She had kept a dagger on for a long time, only to remember she had stopped wearing it since starting school. In the next second, her hands were pinned directly over her head by a man's grip. He was so powerful she could not resist, though she tried her very best to use every trace of energy within her to break free of him. Chapter 13. Only I can do this to you, my woman. I never knew this is how strong my girlie is. Dawn Tyme heard a familiar gentle voice in the midst of her frantic struggle and startlingly opened her eyes to find Jian's bewitching face grinning back at her. His eyes were filled with playful amusement. Dawn was truly frozen in shock. She thought it was someone else, she thought she fell into a trap, and she thought she would not have the privilege of appearing before him again. She was brought to the edge of a mental breakdown in an instant. She stared intently at Jian while panting hard, the corner of her mouth twitched anxiously, and the hands that were in Jian's were trembling. Her eyes were filled with grievance, fear, and a trace of hopelessness that had yet to fade. Jian looked at Dawn before him and was scared to wit's end. His heart thumped as he fiercely pulled her into his arms, and as he held her tightly, he muttered, "Are you okay? What's the matter? Dawny baby, say something please." At that moment, Jian panicked. He became more spooked than Dawn was. Jian's burning warm and firm embrace caused the dam of emotion in Dawn to break, and she could no longer hold it in. Her eyes quickly reddened and tears of shock began to pour out of her eyes. Dawn cried out in grievance. Sob, why did you have to do that? You've scared me to death. I thought it wasn't you. I was so scared that I wouldn't be able to see you. Why did you have to scare me? Didn't you know that I'm already very afraid of you? She was not loved by either of her parents since she was young, so she did not carry any attachments. All she knew was to live each day happily as much as she could. But when Nancy told her about her birth story, she told her that she needed to expose the true colors of the bad people so the Tyme family would not continue to suffer at the hands of these villains. An emotional attachment formed in her heart. Dawn wanted to do all she could to protect the Tyme family, to fulfill Nancy's dying wishes, which one of them was to be a good wife to Jian since he was the one that had brought the Tyme family heirloom back to them. She believed that if he was unhappy, he could take it back at any time. That was why she was so cautious around Jian, and she always would be. If she had lost herself to someone else, what was she going to do? Jian felt the racking sobs of the little woman in his embrace, and his heart broke over and over again for her. When he heard her say that she was afraid that she would lose herself to someone else and would be ashamed to appear before him, his heart leaped for joy. His husky, hoarse voice rang. "I'm sorry, it's my bad, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have scared you, I shouldn't have allowed you to feel such fear, and I shouldn't have driven you to hopelessness." One of his hands was patting and soothing her back gently as remorse filled his heart. He was crafting a reply for an important document when she knocked for the first time, and as soon as he was done with the reply, he opened the door immediately as soon as she tried to knock the second time. "I've missed you too much, so I wanted to come to see you. I can only secretly arrange for you to meet me here since you didn't want us to be too flashy in school," Jian explained softly. "It's my fault that I didn't look at the big picture. I won't do it again. However, no one else, other than me, would have the chance to do this to you. My woman, other than me, no one else is allowed to do so." Jian's arms were securely around her as he patted her back and kissed her head as he consoled her. After a long while, the woman in his arms started to calm down. The little hand that was tightly grasped on his shirt began to loosen. It was only then when Jian slowly increased the distance between them enough to lower his head down to look at her dampened eyelids and bent down to kiss her tears away. At that moment, Dawn felt like the cold, ruthless man before her had presented all the tenderness he could muster before her. In his eyes, she could even see the fear that was not supposed to be there. Jian was the kind of person that would fight Hades for his prey, lived on the edge precariously, and one who had stared at the darkest, most dire evil in the eyes with not an ounce of fear. However, in the current moment, she clearly saw sadness in his eyes. By the time Dawn had come to her senses, Jian had already swept her off her feet and placed her on a leather chair while he knelt before her and gently wiped the tears off of her face. This man could always inadvertently make people fall uncontrollably into the love trap that he had carefully laid out for them. "You're not busy with work anymore?" Dawn asked softly. "Why did you come all the way here?" "Still busy, but..." Jian's eyes were filled with sincerity and forbearance. "I miss you, and I couldn't hold it in, so I came here." He did not look like the high and mighty company president that he was, but instead, he looked like a pleading kid asking for candy. Dawn chuckled. "Are you ditching work just to be here right now?" Dawn took the hands that had been wiping her tears away and teased. "You've got to be careful that someone would take advantage of your work ditching and snatch your projects away from you then. Who asked you to scare me instead of working properly, as you should?" Jian's heart felt like it could finally settle on the ground after seeing her laugh. He tapped her cute button nose and said with much confidence, "Those people can't even win against Sean. How would they even dare to snatch my prey from me? I'll be back home once I'm done with school for the day. You didn't have to come all the way. You didn't allow me to stay within the school compounds, and you've always gone to work really early and come back really late. It certainly didn't seem like you'd miss me. Also, it's only been half a day today." Perhaps, after she saw how deep and moving Jian's love for her, Dawn started to relax her usual carefulness towards him and faced him normally. She had also started to joke around with him. "Madam, are you complaining that I didn't miss you before?" Jian smiled dazzlingly. This little woman had started getting jealous of his work. Abruptly, he got up from the floor and trapped Dawn between his arms bent down and breathed huskily in her ears. "You were at home then, but it's different here. Too many wolves around right here, so I worry that you'd be swooped away by one of them." As soon as he was done speaking, A scalding kiss left her elegant neck and was planted directly onto her lips. Jian, Mose. The unexpected kiss had Dawn's mind wiped blank. If she was at home, she would obediently comply with Jian's every action and do what every husband and wife does dutifully, but she was at school, so she panicked and tried to push him away. Shh. Jian, with the bad boy smile tugging at his lips. Someone else is resting in the office next door, and this place isn't very soundproof. As he coaxed, he rained down on her once again. Donnie, I've missed you so much. Dawn heard Jian calling out her name while his face was buried in her neck. His voice was laced with painful restraint. Just as Dawn thought that Jian would finish her there and then, he slowed down and placed a restraining halt on all his emotions. He had also stopped proceeding with the more passion-inducing next step. Dawn stared aghast at Jian's bloodshot eyes and his sudden stop of movements. Uneasiness, shyness, and shock rushed over her. Was he unhappy from all her feeble attempts to resist him? Even though it was not like she wanted to continue with it, she just did not want to rain on his parade, since she wanted to please him anyway. Chapter 14, Kiss Me. Immediately, right now. Jian's eyes were still as intoxicating as a drug, and his illicit charm enticingly bewitching. As he watched Dawn's face blush and become increasingly bashful under his actions, his lips curled up into a satisfied smile. Dawn felt a little apprehensive under his gaze, so she timidly asked as she scrunched up her face. What? Jian lowered his head down and pecked a kiss on her forehead, trying his very best to restrain himself. You're too little. As he said it, his hand retracted unwillingly from the pair of plush bunnies under her shirt. Immediately, Dawn thought that Jian despised her lack of size. Has he already started despising me right now? She lowered her head in embarrassment, pursing her lips as she examined herself. She muttered, Am I little? I think I'm all right. Aside from other things, her body shape was one of a few things that Dawn still had quite some amount of confidence in. When she first hit puberty, she had grown so fast in that area that she did not dare to stand up straight since she was a little embarrassed by it. She did not expect to be disappointing at her current age. Jian saw how hurt she looked and where she was looking and instantly realized that she had misunderstood. He explained hastily. Don't overthink. I was talking about your age, you're still a little girl. Jian then reached out his hand and tidied up her messy hair and continued. Just wait a little while more, until you're all grown up, until you're no longer afraid of me, until you're completely willing. Jian did not tell her how remorseful he felt after sleeping with her without taking into account her reluctance. Even though he would take responsibility, he made her fear him. He remembered so clearly that when he touched her body the next day, Dawn's subconscious reaction was to hide away and resist him, and it broke his heart. He was too much of a monster that day, she was barely even 19. Dawn, who was in Jian's loving embrace, had a sudden realization that he had only slept with her the first time they met, and since then, for such a long period of time, all he did every night was to hug her to sleep, and the furthest he went was exactly where he was today. And that was it. How much loving tenderness was hidden in the deep crevice of this man's heart? After leaving the database room, Dawn was reminiscing the moments when she first saw Jian while she made her way back to the military training field. When she was almost there, Dawn, who was mentally occupied, was not paying attention to the road before her and bumped into something that was neither soft nor hard. When she raised her head to realize that it was a man, Dawn took a few steps back alarmed and stood at an acceptable distance. She apologized sincerely. Sorry I wasn't paying attention. The man was clad in a drill sergeant's uniform, so he could be a drill sergeant. She did not bump into him with much force, so there shouldn't be any problems, right? Dawn waited anxiously for the man to speak. At the current moment, Dawn was still basked in the aftermath of Jian's flame-inducing actions and the memories of their first encounter, so her face that was flushed was tinged with a red blush, making her look delectable and demure, enticing others to want to take a bite out of it. Her charmingly exquisite face was breathtaking. The man laughed out of the blue. Ha, No harm done for a man to be bumped into like this. You're not hurt, are you? The man took a step forward as soon as he was done speaking, wanting to check on her to see if she was injured. Dawn immediately took another step back when she saw him approaching her and keeping her distance. She said in a shrill voice, "I'm okay too. Since we're both okay, I've gotta go for my military training. I'll take my leave." Before the man could say anything in reply, Dawn was already out of his sight. Dawn was someone who was clear of her standing. It was very easy for misunderstandings to happen between a man and a woman, and also, since her Jian was such a sensitive, dictatorial man, it was beneficial to her and others if she had kept her distance with other men. However, a flash of amusement rushed through the eyes of the man when he saw how frantically Dawn tried to escape. Back at the military training field, the rest of the students had already done one round of training and were resting. When Dawn returned, the second round of training had just begun. When she raised her head, she found that the drill sergeant standing in front was the man that she had bumped into just now. The drill sergeant glanced at her briefly and said, "You had just arrived, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Jason Zook, and I'm the drill sergeant for your platoon, Team Alpha. You can come to me anytime during your training period if you have encountered any problems at all. Besides that, please add yourself into the Team Alpha group chat." As he was speaking, he looked at the rest of the group and ordered, "Oh yes, please add your phone numbers into the description column of your group chats just in case if there are any training-related emergencies that arise. We would be able to contact you directly." Shino was the one in charge of the administrative matters of the class. She clearly did not want Dawn to join them, but the drill sergeant ordered that everyone had to be added to the group for personal safety reasons. When it was time for school to end, the students were so tired they were howling exhaustedly. They were all princes and princesses of their families who have never experienced such endurance training, so once school was over, they all ran out of the school compound in a frenzy. Before Jian left, he reminded her that he would come and pick her up from school when she was done. As soon as she walked out of the school gate, she saw Jian's car, a subdued custom-made black Cadillac, parked in a distance. When she walked closer, she saw Sean on the driver's seat, and from the window, she saw Jian resting with his eyes closed at the car's back seat. Dawn thought that Jian must be really tired and was resting, so she pulled open the passenger seat door and was about to enter the car when the back seat door popped open, followed by a stern voice that said, "Sit beside me." "Oh." Dawn obediently ditched the passenger seat, went to the back, and sat beside Jian. "So reluctant to be near me." Jian was slightly displeased. Seemed like they did not spend enough snuggle time at school just now. "No." Dawn was guilty as she explained. "I saw that you were resting, and I didn't want to disturb your sleep." Dawn was really conflicted as well. She felt that she could not be herself around Jian, but every time when Jian spoke words that moved her, she felt like she was about to cave in once more. However, as time passed, when she saw him again, things would go back to square one, and it would be just cautiousness towards him once more. Then, "Kiss me." The car engine was just ignited when Jian shot out a sentence like that out of the blue. Sean, a seasoned driver, had nearly stalled his car. The car drifted for a split second before it went back to normal again. What was going on with Sermos? If he did not hear it with his own ears, Sean would not have believed that this was something that a Sermos would say. According to Sermos's personality, shouldn't he just lean in and kiss her immediately? That should go without saying. Even Dawn, who was the recipient of said sentence, turned and looked at Jian dumbfounded. She thought she had heard wrongly. She could let what had happened in the database room go, but this time around, Sean was present. Dawn peeked at Jian and quickly lowered her head. "I'll pretend that I didn't hear anything." "I didn't hear anything." Alas, the big boss had taken the initiative to speak out, so there should be no reason that it could not be done. Instantly, Jian cocked his eyebrows and a soul-piercing question arose icily from his tone. Dawn bit her lips and mumbled, "Sean's still here. What are you doing?" "It's fine, he can't see." Jian was unfazed as he replied, Sean thought to himself, "You're blind, you're a statue that doesn't see or speak." Dawn. Her face was filled with helplessness. While she was perplexed, her phone rang out of a sudden. Dawn grabbed onto it like a life-saving float and answered it immediately, not even paying attention to who was calling. "Hello, is this Dawn?" It was an unknown male voice, but it was a vaguely familiar voice. Dawn stole a peek at Jian and answered carefully. "Yes, it's me." "You are." Chapter 15. You don't have to work so hard, you have me. Jian, who was at the side, had an icy cold expression on his face once he heard that it was a stranger. Immediately, he snaked an arm around Dawn's waist and pulled her close to herself while he demanded, "Put it on speaker." As if to mark his territory. The first day of school and a stranger calls on the phone already. He's got to see if this is a wolf or a hound. Dawn did not want Jian to misunderstand, so she felt that it was best to put it on speakerphone as well. She pressed on the button to switch it to speakerphone and Jason Zook's voice rang casually from the phone. "I'm your drill sergeant." "Oh, the thing is, are you still within the school compound? You've been more than an hour late for training today, so if you are still within school compounds, I'll wait for you on the field to catch you up on all that you've missed today." Up till this point, Jian's face was so dark it could not get any worse. Anger bloomed in his eyes as he snatched Dawn's phone from her hands and asked icily, "What's your name?" Even if Dawn could not tell, all men understood the message in between the lines. Since when were there drill sergeants that would catch people up on training after training time, and even to invite a fellow student down to the field? Was his brain filled with semen? How dare he lay his hands on his woman? On the other side, Jason heard a man's voice on the other side of the phone, and he frowned. He tried to probe by throwing the question back at the man on the phone. "Who are you?" "I'm her man. Jian. Mose." Jian's voice was firm yet stern as he spat out the last two words. The ferocious gleam in his eye suggested that if Jason were to be in front of him now, he would tear him apart right away. Dawn, who was by his side, was frightened by that look of his. She kept her mouth shut tightly, not even daring to exhale loudly as she watched Jian hang up the phone and glanced at the phone number. He had a photographic memory. After Jian hung up the phone, he stared at Dawn intently, making Dawn squirm from the inside out as she rushed to explain herself. When we parted, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going and bumped into him by accident. I didn't know then that he would be our drill sergeant, and we're asked to add our phone numbers in the group description, and the rest is history. Please don't misunderstand." Dawn's voice became gradually softer as she finished talking. Do you want me to get a new number?" Dawn was eager to prove herself. "No need. He's the one that had disturbed you, so he's the one that should pay the price." Jian looked at her, while the hand on her waist tightened intuitively. He asked her with a gloomy, icy tone, "Is military training fun?" Dawn was startled. Her jovial eyes blinked several times as she thought, by the looks of it, Jian's angry right now. If I were to tell him that training is fun, would he think that I have the wolves at school in my heart? I've got to learn to be smarter. Not fun. Dawn said with a face full of sincerity. It's tiring and it's really hot under the sun. Well, since it's not fun, then just skip it and go to school after orientation is done. Jian had instantly decided for her with a cold voice with no room for discussion. Sean, get it done tomorrow. Dawn felt like she was being roped into an elaborate ruse. She scrunched up her little face in protest and glared at Jian. However, as much as she was unhappy, she could not beat him in a fight. He had just said that she should not be the one to pay the price, but took her military training time away in the very next second. Jian did not look at her once he was done speaking. Dawn was in his arms, and when she lifted up her head, all she could see was his clearly defined jawline. After seeing that he was not going to change his mind, she admitted defeat and mumbled an unwilling, "Okay. It's fine, she'll treat it as a blessing in disguise since she didn't really want to go for training anyway, and it would be awkward if she were to meet with that drill sergeant again after what happened today." Dawn thought that this man was a little too sensitive since the other party did not even say anything much. She had to miss military training right now, so she swore to herself that she would look where she went when she starts class next time, and she would keep her distance with men. And if this were to happen again, she would rather fall than bump into anyone ever again. She was deep in thoughts until she felt a glowering stare from the person next to her, who proclaimed with unyielding determination, "Kiss me now then." Quickly. This man had not forgotten about that. Dawn gloomily wanted to sneak a peek at him, only to meet his gaze full on when she lifted her head, and that collision of sight shook her heart. Her ears quickly blushed red. From the looks of it, if he did not get his kiss today, he would pursue it relentlessly. Dawn looked at Sean at the front and simply closed her eyes, lifted her chin, and pecked Jian full on his slightly cool lips. Like a task given to her, and it was something that she wanted to get over and done with. Once her lips touched Jian's, she wanted to hastily end the kiss right then, but Jian did not give her this opportunity as he cupped her head quickly with his hands. He steered in strongly, deepened the kiss as he explored and wandered, and it was almost like this was his jealousy-tinged punishment. He kissed Dawn with so much force Dawn was quickly out of breath. Just as she was about to pass out, Jian grudgingly released her, even though his hands were still cupping her head, and his forehead was resting on hers. He looked at Dawn take in deep gulps of breath with her face flushed red from the lack of air and called her abruptly by her full name. "Dawn Tyme, you've gotta be obedient. Am I not obedient enough?" Dawn muttered sadly under her breath. She was already so careful with him. She had never been so careful with someone else's emotions before in her entire life. Humph. How else am I supposed to be more obedient? Dawn raised her little fists in the air mentally. Jian looked at how she was mad, but did not dare to be angry outwardly, and he burst out laughing. His laughter was full of tenderness and fondness. He sat her properly at her seat and threw a soft, "Good girl." The unavoidable public display of affection almost had Sean storming away without the car, or to get off the car to smoke so he could give the couple enough time and space to be lovey-dovey. It was clear that his Sermos was too eager, and by the looks of the jealous explosion earlier on, one cigarette was barely enough time for them. In that thought, Sean floored the accelerator which he put himself in his president's shoes, and he felt like his president desperately needed the bed at home now. The car jerked forward, and Dawn, who was caught off guard, crashed into Jian's embrace. At that moment, Jian wanted to give Sean a good job sticker and looked at Sean through the rearview mirror. As the both of them shared a look, they seemed to have silently communicated something. Right after that, Jian looked smilingly at the woman in his arms. At night, Jian did something that was out of his usual routine. He would usually work in the study, but today, he took his laptop with him to the bedroom and laid on the bed with Dawn in his arms to work with one hand. Was it because he was afraid that there would be wolves outside at night to take his little woman away? What Dawn did not expect was for Jian's study to be filled with all types of books, from literature to finance-related, from psychology to history of politics. The saying Rome was not built in a day was right. For Jian to be so successful, it really took a lot of time and effort on his part. Dawn picked out a literature-related book from the galore of books to read. "You don't have to work so hard, you have me." Jian frowned for a while before he continued. "If you want to gain the approval of the Tyme family, just leave that to me." Dawn had never told him her life story in detail because she did not want him to shun her for having such a complicated family background. With that being said, Jian was adamant not to bring it up because he did not want her to think that he ordered a background check on her behind her back, but he could clearly tell that she wanted the approval of the Tymes. So, he really wanted to let her know that, as long as she needed him, he would be there at all times to be her safety net despite all odds. Chapter 16. Don't lick your ice cream. I have no self-control when it comes to you. Dawn was a little taken aback when she heard Jian's proclamation, but that shock quickly wore off. That's true, it would be easy for him to find out about all these things. I want to shine so brightly that the Tymes would acknowledge my efforts. Dawn looked up at Jian and said, "Thank you for being so kind to me." Thank you for taking care of my feelings so carefully despite already knowing all of them. Thank you for still loving and caring for me with all your heart even knowing you clearly knew that I had married you because of Tyme's selfishness and greediness. In my heart, you're the brightest star in the entire galaxy. Jian caressed her face with his fingers as he reassured her. If they can't see that, they're blind. His phone rang just as he was done speaking. Sir Mose, Jean just sent some files over. Do you want to take a look at them? I'm just about to reach home. It was Sean, informing that poor Jean had already reached Africa. No need, you can do as you see fit. Jian replied. Suddenly he took his phone away, looked at the very intently reading Dawn in his arms, and asked, Do you have anything you want to eat? I'll get Sean to bring some back. Dawn perked up as soon as she heard food. After contemplating, she did not really know what she wanted to eat, but she felt a little warm, not sure if it was from Jian's too high of a body temperature, or from him hugging her so tightly. I want to eat an ice cream cone, can I? Dawn carefully made a tentative suggestion. Now? Jian frowned. It was already nighttime. Would it be bad for girls to eat cold things at night? Just as he was stuck on the fence, the woman in his arms chirped up once again. Her tone was soft and pleading. Just a small one. She had even gestured a small one towards him with her hands. He admitted that he had no resistance when it came to her little cheekiness and her being all cutesy with him, even if her tone was not as coquettish as it seemed, but as long as there was a tinge of pleading in her eyes, he would not be able to refuse. Hence the direct order on the phone for Sean. Bring an ice cream cone back. I'm almost reaching Regal now. Sean protested instantly. So? Jian was apathetic. It's fine, I'll go out again to get some. Sean felt helpless. Regal, the Mose villa was not located at the city center. At that time, Jian wanted some peace and quiet, so he bought land in the urban side of the city and had Regal built from scratch. He was now about to reach Regal, and it would take more than 10 minutes for him to reach somewhere that sells ice cream cones. Even if he were to bring it back, it would have melted on the way. This was a test for his driving skills. In the past, kings and kingdoms would fall because of beautiful women, and in the present, Sir Mose was ready to order a mad dash just for an ice cream cone. Sean had never thought that the first few times he would run a red light would be for an ice cream cone buying emergency. Don't eat too much. Jian nagged as he saw how elated Dawn was when she had gotten her hands on the ice cream cone. Dawn devoured the ice cream cone happily, absolutely clueless from the fact that Sean had brought it home with much difficulty. Jian had a napkin tucked in her shirt to prevent the drippings on her clothes. As Dawn ate her ice cream cone bit by bit, she began to feel someone's body temperature rising fast, and when she lifted up her head to look at him, she saw the intuitive bobbling of his Adam's apple. Dawn was blissfully ignorant and confused. The adorably innocent confusion that colored her eyes, together with the remnants of the ice cream on the corner of her mouth, was the last straw that broke the camel's back. It was the first time that Jian had such a perplexed expression on his face. He turned his gaze away immediately and pressed Dawn's innocent-looking face down. His voice, which was tightly packed with suppressed desire, was hoarse. Don't lick your ice cream cone. I have no self-restraint when it comes to you. Just now, as Dawn was inconsistently licking her ice cream cone, her little tongue went up and down the ice cream cone, making Jian feel hot and bothered while he watched her. He really wanted to. Clearly, Dawn had no idea what was going on. She thought he was shunning her, so she glared at the ice cream cone before her with suppressed grievance and lamented in her heart. Was there no freedom to eat her ice cream too? Was she supposed to maintain her prim and proper stance at all times? What happened to pampering her? Men were indeed habitual liars. I won't eat it any more then. Dawn passed the ice cream cone to Jian sadly. Jian took it immediately and threw it into the trash like it was burning his hand. Then, he was visibly relieved. Dawn looked exasperatedly at Jian's series of weird actions, bit her lips, and decided to sleep on it. The way he looked at her made her uncomfortable. I'm gonna go sleep. Dawn said to Jian. Rest earlier too. Okay. Jian tucked her in, then he gently patted her to sleep with one hand. It was near midnight when Jian was finally done with all his work. Dawn was fast asleep at that time, and after Jian had put away his laptop, he massaged his temples for a while before climbing into the bed and hugging Dawn's petite waist from behind. She would never go near to him on her own initiative. Every night, he forcefully snuggled her, just like tonight. He would deliberately remove Dawn's blanket for the little lady that was fast asleep to turn and make her snuggle into Jian's warm embrace. After she had lost the warmth of the blanket, she would swing her arms over Jian's perfectly sculpted waist and continue to sleep. Jian looked at the girl that had burrowed her way into his arms for warmth and smiled satisfyingly. He chuckled and covered the blanket over them once more. Such a lowly man to have to scheme his way to a hug. He looked unmovingly at Dawn's serene sleeping face and for a long time. This was something he had imagined for such a long time, to be able to turn his head as he was getting work done to see his girl sleeping peacefully by his side. He did not hold back the desire to kiss her forehead and on her ruby-red lips, but he felt a little lonely inward. When would you hug me on your own accord? When would you take the initiative to be closer to me? When would you be able to be unashamedly yourself in front of me? Dawn, even though the days may be long, but I can't wait much longer anymore. Chapter 17. After seeing the buried fear in her heart, he panicked. No, I was wrong. I know I'm wrong now. Jian was almost asleep when he heard the fearful murmurs of the one in his arms. The arms around his waist also tightened significantly, tearing at his skin, but his heart was hurting. Immediately, he sat up, turned the bedside lamp on, and called out to her softly. Donnie. No, stop hitting me. I was wrong. This time, Jian heard her murmurs clearly, and his heart was twisted up in a bunch. His voice was drenched with gentleness as he assured her. Don't be scared, I'm here. There, Donnie. Jian wrapped Dawn tighter in his hug. One of his hands grasped her restless hands firmly, and he said, No one will dare hit you. Don't be afraid, I'm here. I'll always be here. Initially, Jian did not want to have her entire background investigated, but when Sean went to find out why she would be the Tyme family's replacement bride, it involved her parentage, so everything was unraveled in that one investigation. When Jian found out that Dawn was constantly beaten and yelled at by Xiaobonnive till the extent she did not dare to go home, he was frustrated at his lack of capabilities. He was vexed at his inability to find her earlier, and he was upset that she had to go through hellish torture. She was so young, she had no one to lean on, and she had to go through so much torture that when Jian read through her file, he was silent for a very long time. Sean thought that the Jian he saw that day was a Jian that was foreign to him. The sense of defeat, the helplessness that rolled off Jian was something that had never happened to Jian before this. Jian, such a powerful, callously cutthroat of a man, had all his arrogance and formidableness stripped off because of a little girl. Later, he wanted to immediately take care of Xiaobon and Sheena, but Sean reminded him that Dawn was already afraid of him, and if he did that, he would just push Dawn further away from him. Besides, the trauma was already present. It was not like if that mother-daughter pair had disappeared, Dawn's memories of them would never be resolved as well, so Jian might as well replace those dark, painful memories with ones where she was loved and pampered. Ah! Dawn woke up with a start all of a sudden and her eyes were bulging and full of terror. If she had not been hugged tightly by Jian, she would have sat up directly. She was still badly shaken when she saw a pair of affectionate and tender eyes looking lovingly at her. She could not help but sink into Jian's arms and hug him so tightly as she whispered, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. Jian's heart crumbled into a million pieces. As he tried to pull the blanket that Dawn had kicked off the bed when she fidgeted over her once more, he saw something behind her that sank his heart into the abyss. His eyes were stormy as he recognized the stark crimson glare of blood. It was also at that moment when Jian realized that the person in his arms had an abnormally high temperature. He reached out and felt Dawn's forehead, and it was burning. Immediately, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. Be here in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The man on the other side of the phone, who had his beauty sleep interrupted, grumbled with a long face. 5 minutes then. Jian's tone was beyond the freezing point. He hung up the phone right after that, refusing any room for discussion. Jian, you are depriving me of human rights, you're oppressing. Before the man could finish, he heard the dial tone on his phone, signifying that Jian had hung up on him. While waiting for the doctor, Jian got up and changed Dawn into long-sleeve pajamas. It would be impossible for him to allow others to see her in her tank top and shorts. After that, he also got out of bed, found a fever cooling patch, pasted it on her forehead, and fed her some antipyretics. His movements were anxiously swift. There was no room for hesitation while Dawn had already passed out from the fever. Jian looked at the patch of blood on the bed, looked through her entire body to look for a wound, only to frustratingly find that there was none. Then, it dawned on him. Was she on her period? Right after that, he got some warm water and wiped her down, placed some feminine products on, and asked the helpers at home to make her some ginger tea. While the tea was brewing, Jian paced back and forth on the corridor. His heart was exploding with worry. He was wearing navy blue silk pajamas that he had only buttoned to buttons at the bottom. As the pajamas' top hung loosely on his shoulders, the view to his chest was as clear as day when he leaned on the railings. Under dim lights, Jian's eyes were depthless. He took out a cigarette and tried to spark the lighter, but to no avail. After a few tries, when the lighter was finally lit, the hands that were trying to light up the cigarette began to shake. It was just a little fever, but in his heart, it was like he had seen the hellish memories that Dawn had kept hidden deep within her memory. His cigarette was finally lit. He took a deep drag, exhaled, and he was surrounded by thick shrouds of smoke. Jian narrowed his eyes as maliciousness flashed dangerously within them. In his head, a scene of the terror-stricken little girl being beaten to hopelessness occupied his mind, and his hands were balled tightly into fists. As the smoke got thicker with each drag, this was a sign of bloodlust awakening. This man panicked. The former devil with blood-stained hands had slowly been awakened at that very moment. It's midnight. What's the emergency? Don't you know how important nighttime is for a man? Tom gently huffed and puffed as he came running in, trying hard to catch his breath. Jian put out his cigarette immediately after he heard Tom's voice and rushed down the stairs in great distress. He was practically carrying Tom up the stairs with one hand, and if he could use just one step to go up that flight of stairs, he would. Hey, boss, what are you doing? I still need my dignity here. Tom was agitated by Jian's actions. He was a 1.8-meter man with 8 packs on his abs, okay? Why was he carried up the stairs like a little midget? Stop your nonsense. I'm worried that your short little legs would delay the treatment that my woman needs. As Jian walked Tom to the room, he took the time to give Tom a quick update about Dawn's situation. She's on her period, but she's sporting a high fever so high she passed out. That's it. Tom was flabbergasted. When he picked up the phone, Jian sounded like someone was on their deathbed and was about to breathe their last, but it was actually just a woman on her period. What else could it be? Jian's expression was cold. What else do you want it to be? No. Okay, calm down. I'll do a full checkup on her, Sir Mose. Would you like you to watch or would you like to wait outside? Tom Genly was a world-renowned doctor with remarkable skills. Nervousness, anxiousness, and emotions like these would not be seen on him until he met Jian. A few years back, when Jian would be constantly injured, Jian would request for no anesthetics when Tom addressed his wounds. He would watch Tom intently as he worked on his injuries, making Tom a nervous, sweating wreck at the end of the operation, so Tom had to discreetly ask Jian to leave, or he would be a little nervous since he was there to treat his woman. All his friends knew that this woman had been in Jian's heart for more than 10 years, and she was more important than his life. Alas, Jian merely glared icily at Tom, and the underlying message could not be more clear, which was cut the nonsense, check now. If he delayed treatment for Dawn's ailment, he would chop off his surgeon's hands immediately. In the end, Tom did a full-body check for Dawn under the anxious scrutinization of Gian, since it was uncommon for a fever to occur during menstruation. Sean, who felt uneasy and terrified, rushed over when the checkup was happening. Gian was paranoid that someone would want to poison his dearly beloved, so he ordered Sean to investigate if the shop that sold the ice cream cone had laced the ice cream with poison. After the commotion of an investigation, they found out that the ice cream shop was an honest business, and there was no such thing as they poisoned the ice cream. With that being said, Dawn sported a fever and passed out in fear and fever after eating the ice cream cone that Sean bought. So, at that moment, Sean was more petrified than Tom was. Chapter 18. This is too embarrassing. Gian, you twat. Sean felt like a second was as long as a decade as he waited painstakingly for the checkup to be done. Finally, when he saw Tom gently keep his pieces of equipment without any gloom on his face, the weight on his heart that he had been carrying was lifted off of him. How's she? Gian asked anxiously. The usually aloof man was now so worried that his voice was drenched in it. Nothing serious. Your madam's body is weakened from quite an elaborate history of cold stress. Based on the many years of my expertise, this may be from the times when she was exposed to cold temperatures, high wind, dampness, or cold water for a prolonged period of time when she was younger, or when she first had her period. The fever is just the prolonged side effect of the cold stress, which was aggravated since her body is weakened from her menstruation. Well, you wouldn't understand it since it's so technical. But basically, she's suffering because her body is weakened from the cold and her menstruation. When Tom was done, he rolled his eyes at Gian and asked, "Did she eat something cold before she slept? If no, I don't think the repercussions would be that strong." "She had an ice cream cone." Gian looked at Sean as he replied. Sean felt a shiver down his spine. Sean was lamenting in his heart. How was this his fault? He did not want to turn back to buy it, but someone exerted his authority down on him, and he was forced to go. Why in the world would you give her an ice cream cone to eat at night? Are you sick in the head? Tom yelped in frustration. Gian pursed his lips. This was his fault for being careless. However, he was helpless against her pleading puppy eyes. It's my bad. For the first time, Gian admitted his mistake in front of Sean and Tom, and a wave of sadness flashed in his eyes. I didn't take good care of her. This exchange had Tom and Sean staring at each other in shock. Was this their dictator of a boss? It was always him who was right, and even if he was wrong, he was right. Today, for a woman, he had admitted defeat willingly. I've prescribed some medication, I'll have someone send it over later. Remember, stop feeding her icy food. She has to keep her body warm. Tom wanted to flee as soon as he was done with his part. He felt that Gian was being unusually weird tonight and he did not want to prolong his stay. I'll go with Tom to get the meds. It'll be faster this way. Sean was ready with his excuse to leave as well since his driving skills were still pretty solid. Gian grunted faintly in reply. Coincidentally, the helpers came in with the ginger tea that was brewing, so Gian stood up to receive it. Tom saw how attentive Gian was to Dawn, and a complicated wave of emotions flashed on his face as he left with Sean. He got into the passenger's seat in Sean's car right after inside. I've never seen this side of Gian before. Isn't he always the haughty I have it all under control big boss? Why was he so dejected today? Tom turned to Sean and asked with all seriousness. You're with him all the time. Do you think, one day, if he finds out that this woman isn't for him, or isn't suitable to be his wife, would he let her go and find someone to replace her? That woman is more important than his life. You've seen it for yourself. Sean blurted out without having to think twice. Besides, what Sir Moles had been building and fighting with his life all these years was all for her. If that's the case, oh no. Little Gian is most probably done for. Tom leaned back in a whoosh as he crossed his arms behind his head. What do you mean? Sean recognized Tom's discomfort. For someone that could make decisions on behalf of Gian, Sean was quick to sense that Tom was not entirely honest, so he asked in a shrill voice. What are you hiding about Madame's ailment? Tom was not surprised by Sean's keen sense of observation. After a long sigh, he sat up straight, turned to Sean, and said, "This woman may be infertile. She was probably the victim of someone else's evil scheme when she was younger. That's why her body had a prolonged history with cold stress, but I'm not entirely sure now. I've taken some of her blood. I'll do some tests with it later when I'm back." What if? Do you think we should tell Jian? Or should we, as his comrades, work hard together to make this woman leave so that Jian would stop pining for her? If you want to do it, don't get me involved. I still want to live for another year or two. Sean rejected his offer immediately. However, his demeanor turned sorrowful the next second as he thought about it for a while. Let's just get the test done, and if things are really as you said, let's tell Sir Mose the truth. You know how he is, whatever that he had decided on, it's not something that would just change even if we try to do something that would make him change his mind. When the results are out, just let him know. I'm sure he has his own considerations. Okay then. Tom shook his head helplessly. That night, Jian did not sleep. He would test her temperature by feeling her forehead every now and then, and he would massage her belly gently with his warm hands and gave her as much warmth as he could when he hugged her. Tom's words were like daggers to his heart. What have you been through when you were younger? Do you know how much I loathe myself, Dawn? Why didn't I find you sooner? My life is a pitch-black hellhole, and you're that light that lights my world up, but I wasn't able to pull you out of hell in time, and you had to suffer all that you did in that abyss. All of a sudden, there was a stirring from the woman in his arms. You're awake. Does your belly hurt? Does your head hurt? Jian frantically put some distance in between them and stared her in her eyes. His eyes were filled with pain for her, and his hand was still on her belly. What happened to me? Dawn frowned her flushed little face and felt like her head was a little floozy. She moved out of Jian's embrace, looked at Jian, and found that his eyes were a little bloodshot with sorrow and worry that had not dissipated. What happened to you? Dawn asked the man before her worriedly. Jian did not want her to worry, so he bent down to kiss her cheeks while he said softly, I'm fine. As for you, silly girl, you're not allowed to eat icy things anymore. This was when Dawn realized the changes in her body and the hot water bottle on her belly. She looked at Jian in shock and felt around her belly and in between her legs just to make sure of something, then looked back at Jian in embarrassment as she bit her lips and could no longer look Jian in the eye. She asked warily, My period is here? Hoping that he would say no. Yep. Jian's face was calm. You took care of me? The embarrassment in Dawn's eyes heightened. Yep. Jian's face was still calm. All you? Dawn wanted to dig a hole in the ground and hide in it. Yep. Jian was so calm there were no traces of other emotions. He had no idea why Dawn was so embarrassed. He may be able to know what the other person's thoughts were with just one look, but this time, he really could not understand. Dawn had already hidden under the blanket. What was she to do? This is so embarrassing. Chapter 19. There would only be times when you can no longer go on, and none of when I age. Puzzled, Jian tried to pull Dawn's blanket off of her head, but the little girlie had used all of her strength to prevent him from doing so. Baby, what's wrong? Jian was worried. Nothing. I'm not awake yet. I want to sleep some more. You should go work. Dawn answered quickly and pushed him away. Go away, or she would suffocate the entire day inside her blanket. She was absolutely ashamed. This was worse than their first night. With that thought, Dawn was so embarrassed her face blushed up all the way to her ears, and they felt scalding hot. This sudden rise in temperature shocked the hand that was still on her belly. Jian thought her fever was back, so he sneaked the blanket, pulling it back on her when she was not expecting it, and what greeted him was Dawn's face and ears that were so red it looked like it was about to explode. Her eyelashes were quivering, and if Jian still did not understand what was going on, he should just retire from the sly and cunning business world there and then. Suddenly, Jian thought that the Dawn like this was extremely squishy and adorable. His lips curled into a smile, and he said, "Are you like this because I've seen you?" At that moment, Dawn was so spooked she immediately raised her hand to cover Jian's mouth, forbidding him to continue his sentence. This was the first time Dawn had initiated physical contact with him by putting her hands on his mouth, and even though its intentions were not ideal, but it warmed his heart. A flash of playfulness appeared in Jian's eyes when he abruptly licked the palm of her hands. The itchy sensation got Dawn to retract her hands like it was shocked by lightning. "You twat." Dawn grumbled under her breath with a voice so soft she was certain only she could hear it. "What did you say?" Jian asked with a chuckle in his heart, because his cutie had finally dared to go up against him, and she was finally not so careful with him anymore. However, when Dawn heard it, she thought he was mad and was angry. She quickly retorted, "Nothing." Then, she pursed her mouth tightly and looked at Jian with innocent puppy eyes. The moment of happiness was short-lived as Dawn rained on his parade. It was okay, however. He was willing to wait for her to slowly open up to him. Jian hugged her again and spoke to her softly so she could overcome her embarrassment. "I'm gonna be the one that takes care of you your whole life. In the next 10, 20, 100 years, when you're old, I'll also take care of you like this, so this isn't something you should feel embarrassed about." As Dawn listened to him, she had a sudden thought. "You're older than me though, so you'll age faster than me, and I'll be the one that takes care of you first. I won't allow myself to age in front of you, and I won't allow myself to die before you do. I'll protect you with my whole life until you rest peacefully 6 feet under." Jian's eyes were unfocused as he stared afar. His girlie had suffered so much in her childhood, so he would take good care of himself in the days to come to take care of her whole life. She would not have to feel a trace of insecurity or loneliness from now on. If it was easy for someone to die for someone else, he would only live for her, and for her alone, he would live his best life. "Besides, I've seen every part of you." Jian suddenly whispered playfully in her ears. His face was framed with an enticing bad boy smile. "Your hubby is strong and mighty. There would only be times when you can no longer go on, but none of when I age." Dawn, who was basked in the moving words of Jian's sincerity, was abruptly greeted with something that would make her ears redder than it already is. She glowered at him. "Dawn." Jian could not help but smile when he saw Dawn's expression. He decided that he would not tease her anymore, so he caressed her face and asked her, "You hungry yet? I'll get someone to send in some food. We'll eat in the room." "What about you?" Dawn asked. "I'll eat after I'm done with some work." "You can go ahead." Jian was already dressed as he got out of the bed. Dawn was about to leave the bed to wash up, but Jian swooped her up in his arms and carried her into the washroom. "Hey, you!" Dawn struggled to get down. "Don't move about, or you'll dirty your clothes." Jian said it nonchalantly, making Dawn quiet immediately. This guy was too much. He clearly knew that she was embarrassed about it, but there he was, bringing it up over and over again. "What a pervert!" Dawn grumbled under her breath with an extremely soft voice, thinking that he would not hear her. Instantly, she felt the hand on her waist cliched her ever so slightly, and a man's face zoomed in before her eyes. A peck landed on her lips. Dumbfounded, she saw her man's meaningful and teasing smile. "Pervert? When you're a little older." Lo and behold, Dawn witnessed an unabashed dazzling smile blooming on Jian's face after he was done talking. Dawn really wanted to pinch his waist and yell, "Jian, you itchy pervert, scram?" However, she did not dare to. She chickened out. All she could do was glower at him and refuse to respond to him. "Open your mouth, brush your teeth." With a glass of warm water in one hand and a prepared toothbrush in the other hand, Jian was about to brush Dawn's teeth for her. Looking at the toothbrush that Jian had passed to her, Dawn came to her senses and realized that he had already placed her down on a high stool by the basin. She saw how Jian was moving, quickly rejected his offer, and took the toothbrush from him. You don't have to treat me like this. I can do it myself. She was still not used to how attentive he was towards her. Doctor said my girlie had to be taken care of with all my heart, and there's no more room for carelessness. Jian was genuinely sincere when he said it. It was his fault for being careless last night. Doctor didn't say you've got to do everything for me though. Dawn looked up at him and smiled. Let me do it. She quickly took the cup and the toothbrush away from his hand. Jian's phone rang, so he reminded her. Don't touch the cold water. I'll get the phone call. He looked at his phone and saw that it was a phone call from Tom, and there was an unusual feeling in his heart as he answered it. What is it? Jian asked as he walked back into the room to get Dawn's slippers to bring it back to the washroom. What are you up to? Tom asked. Spit it out, don't waste time. Jian was already back in the washroom, so he held the phone in between his ear and his shoulder as he knelt down before Dawn to put the slippers on for her, got up, and held the phone properly with his hand again. The entire flow of movement was natural and pampering. Your little woman is beside you. I want to tell you something about her. Tom had finally said it. Jian glanced at Dawn subconsciously and frowned slightly. Tom's tone gave him a forbearing feeling. Just in case Dawn heard it and it would affect her, Jian gave her an excuse for his leaving. I'll go get some food for you, wait for me. After Jian left the room, he asked with a stern voice. I could tell that you haven't finished what you wanted to say. What's wrong with her? Indeed, no one could hide anything from him. Tom shrugged exasperatedly. What kind of god was this man? Chapter 20, Eat Up. Are you serious about Dawn? Tom gently probed. If you're here to be a naysayer, you can shut it. Jian replied with displeasure. No, listen. You've seen what happened yesterday. No normal girl would have sported a high fever on her period. Tom was patient as he tried to elaborate. Even if they've had ice cream, it won't be that bad. Your point is? Jian was filled with disdain as he harumphed. What does it concern you if my girl is normal or not? I don't mind. His tone was laced with a you'd better watch what you say next and give me a perfect explanation, or I'll have you die 1,000 times for the blasphemous things you've said about my girl. If that's the case, I'll be completely frank with you. Tom had known Jian for a long time, and he knew that Jian was a straightforward, no-frills kind of guy, so he told Jian straight up. Your woman may not be able to conceive children in this life. Tom did not receive any response for a long time after he was done speaking. For a moment there, he thought with the fluke mentality that his good friend had immediately understood the implications of this matter and was ready to let go of this one to find another normal one. Frankly, he should not be blamed for being inhumane, since as a friend, he would wish the best in every area for his friend. Just as Tom was congratulating himself, Jian's cold yet firm voice rang from the other side of the phone. Okay, I understand. Bring this knowledge with you to your grave. If my woman hears of any rumors about this and her mood is affected, you'll be the first one to take the blame. No, wait, are you sure you're not gonna reconsider? Tom was still trying to salvage the situation. Reconsider what? Are you asking me to abandon her? All that I have now is for her. She's the sole ray of light in the darkest period of my life. She was the reason I built my empire, and you want me to chase her away? Then what do I do with all these things I've conquered for her? From the day I found her, there was no one, nothing in this world that could separate me from her. Jian's every word was steadfast, firm, and laced with pain. Even if we don't have children, it would be because of my inabilities. Not hers. Tom was silent after he had heard it all. That was true, he was the one that was the butt of the joke. Since the beginning when he knew this man called Dion, he had never seen him give up on the things he had set his eye on halfway. He would never do anything redundantly. Once he was sure about something, he would do everything he could to obtain it, and nothing could change his mind. It was this trait of his that brought him step by step forward till where he was now. If he were to give up easily, he would have died several times by now. Tom, do your best to make her well. Jian pleaded. Are you still regretting this a little then? Tom barked. I just don't want to rob her of her privilege to be a mother. Make her well, this life is really short. I don't even have enough time to love and pamper her, so we would only have children only if she wants to. This life's a short one, and it would be too ambitious to talk about the next one. If it was not for you all those years ago, my life would have just been spent groveling in that village. You were the one that allowed me to taste the rare goodness present in this world. From that day onwards, I vowed to protect you. I vowed to make you the happiest every day of your life. I know that winner takes it all in this world, and only kings could do whatever they please, so I worked hard day and night, trying to shorten my journey to success. All this while my heart missed you, and that longing to meet you had tortured me day and night. My castle was gradually growing, and now that it's an impregnable fort, I found my princess, so how am I supposed to let you go again? I wasn't capable enough to protect you when I was young, and it had left an ingrained trauma on your childhood. Now that you're by my side, I will do all I can to protect you, to take care of your feelings, and despite all else, I just want you to stay by my side for the rest of our lives, and nothing else would matter anymore. When Jian went back into the room, he started arranging the different dishes for her like nothing had happened. The kitchen had specially prepared this for you. I'll get some work done in the study. If you feel uncomfortable, let me know immediately. Okay. Jian was worried that Dawn's fever would return, so he had decided to work from home today, so he could be at an arm's length away from her. I have no appetite. I don't feel like eating. Dawn scrunched up her face up in guilt. I'll eat later, okay? Not only did she not have an appetite, but she was also feeling a little nauseous as well. She knew about her body. Every time her period began, she would feel extremely uncomfortable. She did not think too much of it and thought that it was a normal occurrence for women on their periods. You've gotta eat. Jian sat right next to her and snaked his arm around her waist teasingly. If you don't eat up, your itty-bitty waist would not be able to withstand the plow. Dawn. This man really had his brains filled with stuff like those for him to be able to relate everything to it. For such a ridiculously handsome face like his to say this kind of things, it made her heart pound furiously in her chest, and she would not be able to look him in the eye, fearing that she would drown in their depths and would not be able to climb out of them. All Dawn could do was to obediently lower her head down to eat, so she could avoid his bewitchingly alluring eyes. Dawn had stayed at home the few days that her period lasted. Her cramps were so bad she was so thankful that Jian had arranged for her to skip military training, or she would definitely suffer a lot if she were to take part in the military training in her current state. After her period had ended, Jian insisted that Dawn stay home for another 2 days before she was allowed to go out. Finally, when she was allowed to go out, she made a beeline to the Tyme family villa, and since it was military training time, Shino was at school and only Enzo was home. With no one around to disturb their father-daughter bonding time, they had a fairly good time together. Dawn would cheekily pull Enzo round the villa for a walk. The Tyme villa was a tasteful architectural combination of elegance and a rustic farmhouse with breathtaking views. Before Dawn left, she pretended that she had lost a bracelet, which was a gift from Mama Nancy to her when she was still alive. In a panicked state, Enzo blurted out, "The Tyme villa isn't as big or as small as one thinks, and with the abundance of different plants, it would be quite difficult for you to find lost things. I'll bring you to the security cameras to see if it would save us some time." Just like that, Dawn was brought to the security control room of the Tyme villa. When Dawn entered, she found out that Enzo kept all the security footage of Nancy when she was alive, probably to replay them, and he missed Nancy. Sorrow overwhelmed Dawn. She tried to hold back tears from welling up her red-rimmed eyes. She found an excuse for Enzo to leave, and since Enzo seemed very sensitive when it came to watching the security tapes, he left quickly. Dawn took this opportunity to make a copy of the security footage from a month before Nancy passed. She has always felt like something was not right regarding Nancy's car accident, but when she woke up, the car was deemed a total loss, and she could not investigate anything. So, she wanted to see if she could find anything new on the security footage. After returning to Regal, Dawn watched the footage closely and paid special attention to the footage from the garage to see if anyone did alterations to the car. However, after some thinking, even if someone were to alter the car, they would not do it at a place with security cameras. Chapter 21. Your husband is a proper businessman. Dawn's eyes were dry and itchy as she watched the security footage. She massaged her temples, stretched a little, and at that moment, she saw Shabanov carrying a vacuum flask in the security footage. Dawn recognized that vacuum flask to be the same one that Shaban had used to keep soup warm. In the footage, Shaban bumped into a Tyme family helper, and when the helper subconsciously reached out in an attempt to take the flask from Shaban, she pushed the helper's hand away, just like how a person would react if someone were to expose them of a bad deed they did. And when things were out in the open, they shunned any contact from the outside world. Shaban's eyes were sensitive and nervous when she glanced at the helper but was quickly changed into a kind, considerate look as she said something to the helper. Soon, the helper chuckled as well when she allowed Shaban to pass and went on her way. Dawn caught onto it like a life-saving float. Immediately, she dialed the footage back to a few days prior to that, and there have been footage of Shaban sending soup. At that moment, something was slowly taking root in Dawn's heart. She switched off everything, closed her laptop, and fell into deep thought. When the night has come, Dawn was already on her side on the bed, so deep in her thoughts that she did not realize that someone had entered the room. What are you thinking about? Why so deep in thoughts? Jian's hands were already slithering up from her waist until they reached her pair of fluffy bunnies. He frowned. How do you not even have a sense of wariness? If she were to encounter people with bad intentions, would she not have been devoured cleanly by them? Looks like this little woman needed some lessons. The sensation on her body caught Dawn by surprise. After hearing Jian's voice, Dawn resumed her calm state. Do I still need to be wary in your villa? Dawn turned to Jian, gave him a smile while Jian bent down to give her a kiss. That's true too. Jian chuckled. His little girlie was slowly understanding the extent of his feeling for her. At least, for now, she already knew that she would be safe with him around. Did anything upset you when you went over to the Tymes today? Jian buried his head into her neck as he continued to shower her with kisses. While he was nibbling on her earlobes, he asked softly. He wanted to accompany her to the Tymes this morning, but Dawn rejected his offer. She said, just go to work. I can go back on my own. I want to speak to father alone. If someone bullies me, I'll call you right away, okay? Little girlie was already clear of his soft spot for her, and she now knew how to talk to him to achieve her purpose. When she was done, she even shot him an innocent, unadulterated smile. Jian was really wrapped around Dawn's little finger. Since he could not say no to her, he sent someone to drive her there and ordered the driver to stay put at the front door of Tyme Villa until Dawn re-emerged from the gate once more. Dawn was overwhelmed with the tingling sensation all over her body from Jian's actions, and her heart was fluttering in her chest. With her ears scorching hot and red, she was so overwhelmed she had no idea what he had said, and all she could do was to push him. Stop it. This feeling was so suffocating Dawn was about to implode. She could not help but whimper as she pushed him. Initially, Jian did not want to tease her too much, and when he said he did not want to, it actually meant that he did not dare to since he was the one that could not take it when she had close physical contact with him. When that time came, the one that had to suppress his urges with much difficulty would still be him. How pitiful! The agony of being able to see but was forbidden to devour. Jian propped himself up on top of her with his hands and smirked at her. Then, he landed a ferocious kiss on her and did not begrudgingly leave before a thorough round of sampling. Okay, I'll wash up. After wiping the bruised corner of his mouth that she had bitten in a huff, he turned and made his way jovially to the washroom to wash up. When he was done, he wrapped Dawn in his arms and was prepared to sleep when he felt the woman in his arms turn around to face him. What is it? Jian frowned. Do you think there's a type of drug in the world that causes no negative reaction at the beginning of consumption, but when consumed for a long time would completely ruin the consumer's life? Dawn asked in all seriousness. When it came to Dawn, Jian would become extremely sensitive. So when she mentioned this, Jian shot her a cold glare as he questioned her. What do you want to do? Thinking of suicide? Thinking of leaving him? Don't misunderstand. Dawn seemed to have realized his unusualness as she quickly explained. I love my life too much to want to die. So it means that you've encountered something at the Times and you didn't tell me. Jian looked at her confidently. Dawn. She really should not have looked him in the eye. Once she looked him in the eyes, there was nothing she could hide from him. How scary was that? After a moment of hesitation, Dawn had decided to tell Jian everything, since by the look on his face, she felt like if she did not tell him on her own accord, he would order Sean to investigate what she did at the Times the very next day, and he would eventually find out about it anyway. Dawn scurried up in his arms till she could look him in the eyes and asked solemnly, would you know anyone that does illegal trading? In Dawn's thoughts, these kinds of drugs would not be ordinary drugstore drugs that one could just buy from anywhere. For the first time, Jian stared at Dawn flabbergasted. Your husband is a proper businessman. You are. Dawn blinked her big innocent eyes as she asked. In her mind, she thought, you certainly don't look like a proper one. Of course. For the first time, Jian was eagerly trying to explain himself to salvage his uncorrupted image. Dawn pouted and disagreed with him in her heart. Rumors had it that he was like a devil. Would a devil run a proper business? If you have your needs, madam, I could fulfill them all as well. Jian clearly saw the unspoken words she had in her heart. Although Dawn was a little fearful of Jian, she was no fool. She knew that Jian had figured out what she was thinking, so she asked with blatant honesty. Would you be willing to investigate it for me? To help me investigate all the people who have bought drugs like these 4 to 5 months ago. You won't get any concrete results if you were to track things like this. Too many people would have bought things at that stage, and the culprit may not have gotten the drugs within the time frame that you had in your mind. They might already be prepared for this for a long time, right? Besides, they would not do things like buying the drugs themselves. As for investigating, Jian suddenly placed his hands inside her silk nightgown and slid his hands up slowly as he said pointedly with an alluring voice. You've got to follow the trail. Alarmed, Dawn quickly tried to catch his misbehaving hands when he trapped her hands, as he became serious again. Donnie, are you sure you want to investigate this? You've actually already have the answers in your heart, but you don't want to believe it, right? Also, even after finding out the truth, would you really annihilate your enemies to avenge the dead? I don't think you would be able to harden your heart enough for this, so my dear girl, do you still want me to proceed with the investigation? Jian did not say this to push the responsibility away, but he did not want the past to continue to affect her mood. Her past was not a pretty sight, and it was not something he wanted her to get her hands dirty with again. However, if Dawn wanted an answer, he would expedite the investigation. Yes. I want to see concrete evidence. I know Father likes Sheena a lot, Grandpa and Grandma like her a lot as well, so I could never destroy her and Shaban Neve. However, avenging someone doesn't just mean an eye for an eye. I just want their schemes to be exposed, so no one else falls victim to it. Isn't that good enough? Also, Shaban has another son. I'm worried that they would empty out the Times and take over everything as their own. When that happens, the Times would be over. I think Mama Nancy was worried about the same thing when she was investigating this as well. Since I was young, Mama Nancy was the kindest person I know. I think she must have found something in her investigation, that's why they had to kill her to shut her up. I don't think she wanted lives to be lost. Now, I want to gather evidence, and when the time is right, I'll hand it all over to Father. Dawn had already thought of this problem, and she was sure she could never take an eye for an eye, but she also could not pretend that nothing happened. Even so, Dawn knew, if she were to tell Enzo the truth now, he would break down, and would even resort to killing himself so he could be with Mama Nancy. So, she could not allow that to happen. Chapter 22, Is your man so unworthy that you have to go camping with someone else? Jian saw how Dawn had unknowingly said so much, and this was her first time telling him what she had hidden in her heart. He saw the uneasiness and sorrow in her eyes. He caressed her face and said softly, "Okay, just leave it to me. In the future, if you have anything that's bothering you, you've got to tell me like how you did today, and I'll settle it for you. I'll hold the fort for you forever." Dawn caught herself by surprise. Was she already lowering her defense towards him? When she looked into his eyes once more, there was a subtle change. It felt like something was slowly fusing harmoniously together. That night, she slept peacefully. Time flew by quickly, and it was almost the end of military training and nearly the official start for school. Jian, who was working, had a sudden thought of something and promptly made a phone call. "Sean, is everything settled at the school? Remember, you just need to pay attention so she doesn't get bullied. As long as she's not in danger, don't have to keep such a close eye on her. She doesn't like it. I will protect you, but I will not imprison you, and I will not strip you of your innocence and naivety. Don't worry, Sir Mose. Everything's settled, and it's all within control." Sean replied confidently. Knock, knock, knock. There was a knock on the door, so after making sure everything was settled, Jian hung up the phone. "Come in." Jian's face was stoic as usual. The one that came in was Jean, who had been missing for quite some time. In his hands were a stack of project data. "You're back. How's Africa?" Jian looked at Jean, whose skin was clearly a shade darker, and teased. "All thanks to you, it was really good." Jean rolled his eyes at Jian disdainfully. "There, all the data is here. I request for a two-day break." "What for?" Jian asked nonchalantly as he flipped through the data. He did not care if Jean answered him or not. "I got to know a girl front here. I want to take a two-day break to bring her camping." Jean replied as he walked to the water dispenser to get himself a drink. He did not even have a water break as he rushed back. Battling in the wild. As soon as Jean finished his sentence, Jian lifted up his head, frowned at Jean, and asked in all seriousness. "Pft, cough, cough, cough." Jean, who was just drinking a cup of water, choked on it and nearly died. He turned around to see Jian's smug face and knew instantly that that fella did it on purpose. "Since you want it so badly, come with us, bro. Bring your little madam along as well, the more the merrier." Jean pulled a chair and sat down before Jian and discussed this matter solemnly with Jian. "There aren't any urgent things for you to decide on for the company these 2 days, so let's take a break. I've already found a place." "Not interested." Jian rejected his offer immediately. "Go away." "Fine by me." Jean shrugged and left Jian to continue working. After Jean had left the office, he went back to Regal and was ready to take a nap. "Hey, you're back." On the living room sofa, Dawn, who was reading a literature book when she saw Jean, who had just came in, exclaimed merrily, "Oh hey, little madam. Why aren't you at the military training, but at home instead?" Jean teased her as usual. "Did Sir Mose catch you doing something wrong, so he took away your military training as a punishment?" He heard stories from Sean. Jean strode to Dawn with a smug smile on his face, as he teasingly said, "If I were you, I won't let Jian have his way. I'd at least protest against him." At that moment, the apple she was eating had suddenly lost its sweetness as she angrily bit into it and glared at Jean. Then, she remembered something and smiled mockingly at Jean. "Oh, so why didn't you protest when he sent you to Africa? You should at least protest so I can learn from you, right? You?" Jean did not expect her to retaliate like this, so he lost it. Dawn smiled triumphantly at Jean and made a face at him while she shoved her chin up high tauntingly. To be fair, Jean was the person Dawn found to be the most easygoing and regal. Jian was too cold, while Sean was too quiet. Jean objected. "Who told you I didn't protest? I'm going on a strike. I'm gonna bring a beauty for camping." "Camping?" Dawn thought about it and asked, "Can I come?" "You've gotta ask your man." Jean stretched lazily as he sauntered to his room. Who else dares make decisions regarding you other than him? When Dawn was younger, she had gotten to know Big Brother, Second Brother, and a few more playmates after she ran away from home. At that time, they would run about the countryside without a care in their minds. Ever since she came to Jian, she no longer had that time, and she missed it. Humans. When they had desires in their hearts, they would begin to look for ways to suck up to the people that could grant them their desires. Usually, when Jian came back home from the office, Dawn would have already washed up and was ready to sleep. No matter if she had really fallen asleep or not, when Jian came through the door, she would have pretended to sleep. It was like she was avoiding any contact other than what was necessary. However, this day, she was reading and waiting at the same time. When she heard the door unlock, she quickly placed her book down, wore her slippers, and greeted Jian at the door. "You're back." Her voice was tinged with a little excitement and joy, which confused Jian when he caught her in his arms. He even felt her forehead to feel her temperature. "Why aren't you resting yet?" Jian looked quizzically at the lively, cheeky smile on Dawn's jovial face, who was eerily similar to a kid asking for candy. This was unusual, and in a short period of time, he could not tell what she was thinking about. "I was waiting for you." Dawn's voice was cheeky too as she shot him an extremely sweet smile. Her charmingly petite face framed her smiling eyes that looked like they were filled with stars, her succulent, plump lips that looked delicate and pretty melted Jian's heart into a puddle. He could not hold himself back as he swept her off her feet and carried her to the bed. Then, he kissed her hard. Stop." Dawn, who was finally released by Jian, was gasping for air, frowned at him. She felt like she was too careless for digging a hole for herself. Thankfully, she did not follow her original plan that she had mentally practiced for several times. She wanted to rush to Jian when he was home, give him a bear hug, and give him a kiss, then plead with him to take her camping. However, when Jian opened the door, she chickened out and chose to play it safe. At that moment, Dawn thought, "Fortunately I didn't initiate a kiss. Or else. Okay, tell me, what do you want to do today?" Jian turned over and laid on her side. He propped his head up with one hand and caressed Dawn's lips with another. His eyes were red with desire. Dawn looked at his amused look and thought to herself, he seems like he's in a good mood now, so he should agree to everything, right? I should strike the iron while it's hot. I want to go camping with Jean. Dawn pursed her lips tightly together right after she had said it. Her heart was pounding quickly in her chest like she was waiting for the final judgment. Suddenly, she saw Jian frown, and her heart went cold. Was he going to reject me? "If you want to go camping, you should go with me." "Why are you going with him?" Jian retorted sourly. Seriously, how could she not go with her man, but want to go with another man instead? What? Was he not worthy? Jian wanted so badly to lie on her and give her a good punishment to remind her once again of his existence as her man. Dawn jumped up in shock. The results turned out to be a good one. Chapter 23, Scouting at the Edge of Danger. The next day, Jian had started preparing for the things that he and Dawn would need for the camping trip as soon as he woke up. "Sir Mose, what are you doing? Are you planning to run away from home?" Jean asked quizzically as he walked into the living room and watched Jian scurry everywhere to pack. He had even gotten himself a thermos jug. "Going camping. I thought you didn't want to go." "I changed my mind." "Any issues?" Jian glared coldly at Jean as he made his way upstairs back to his own bedroom. Jean was puzzled as he scratched his head. Until he saw Dawn walk out of the room when it hit him. Little Madam did mention something about wanting to go camping as well. Was that why Sir Mose changed his mind? It seemed like Jean had to reevaluate the importance of this Little Madam in their Sir Mose's heart. After everyone got out of Regal and hopped onto an MPV, this was the first time Jean introduced his partner to Dawn. "Let me introduce to you our Mrs. Mose." Jean pointed at Dawn as he introduced her. "Nice to meet you. I'm Dawn." Dawn politely introduced herself to Jean's partner. "Nice to meet you too, I'm Ginny Shane, Jane's friend. Ginny responded with ease. Ginny was 2 years older than Dawn. She had a head of beach wavy hair, clad in a figure-fitting sports attire, and had a friendly smile. She seemed like a nice person to get along with. After Jean had introduced everyone, he smiled gleefully at Ginny, then at Dawn, and said, "I've got to thank you, little madam. If it weren't for you, I don't think I would ever step foot in Africa, and I wouldn't get to know Ginny, who was there on vacation. When we're there at the campsite, I'll hunt some delicacies as my token of appreciation to you, little madam." Jean rested his hand on Ginny's shoulder, earing him a bashful hit from Ginny. Not sure where was the campsite that Jean chose, but since the journey took a long while, and the road on the way there was quite bumpy, Dawn nearly fell asleep amidst the rocking of the car. Jean pulled her into his arms, and found her a comfortable position for her to rest. When they were almost there, it was already evening time. When they were there, they found out that it would be a night of shooting stars there, and it was Ginny that wanted to come to watch. After they got down from the car, Dawn and Ginny rested at the side while the few men started to pitch their tents. Dawn surveyed her surroundings and found that she was in a patch of deep forest within a mountain, and it was different from where she used to play. There were funny-looking rocks everywhere, trees that were as tall as skyscrapers, and a little stream. It was different from the big grass plain that she was familiar with. This place looked a little eerie in comparison. Before it was completely dark, Sean suggested for them to fish, while Jean was helping his beauty set up her telescope. "I want to go fishing too," Dawn chimed in gleefully. "Okay, I'll get the rods prepped." Jean turned, took over the rods from Sean, and adjusted them. As Dawn was preparing to walk towards the stream, Jean called for her to stand there and don't move. Before Dawn could realize what was happening, Jean took big strides back to their tent and took out a pair of boots. "Lift up your feet." Jean knelt before Dawn and wore the boots for her. "It's pretty wet near the stream bank, so don't catch a cold." All Dawn wanted was to go fishing quickly. She was already used to Jean's antics, so she quickly wore the boots and made her way happily to the stream with Jean following closely behind. At the side, Ginny, who was watching Jean as he adjusted her telescope, witnessed the entire exchange, and she was stunned. "Jean, are you sure this is the ferocious, ruthless, and heartless Mr. Mose from the rumors? Did the rest of the world misunderstand something? Other than his face, it seems like he was the exact opposite of what was rumored about him." Jean, who was focused on adjusting the telescope, only heard the last line of what Ginny had said, turned to her exasperatedly and smacked her on her bum. "Why, my face isn't enough for you to look at?" Needless to say, Jean's face was pretty charmingly exquisite as well. As the skies grew darker, Sean was the only one that was truly fishing. Jean and Dawn, on the other hand, were busy with each other. Dawn took up the duty of grilling the fishes since she claimed to have done that several times before and that her skills were impeccable. Jean took her words with a grain of salt as he watched her skewer the fishes and place them on the grill. As she skillfully turned the fishes around, the bonfire heat caused her little face to be flushed, and it looked like she was glowing in the light and was dazzling like stars. Even the dust specks on her butt and nose looked adorable. Jean wished that the world would just pause at that moment. A gentle breeze picked up a lock of Dawn's hair and scattered it over her forehead. Jean gently took that stray lock of hair, tucked it behind her ears, and murmured, "Dawnie." His voice was silky smooth, enticingly magnetic, and deeply alluring, bringing a warm sensation flowing into Dawn's melting heart. Dawn turned around in response. "Hum? Jean landed a soft kiss onto Dawn's lips, which fluttered through like a dragonfly on water. Dawn's pupils constricted as she heard him say, "You're so beautiful, my madam." This man knew exactly what it meant to be the deadliest temptation. His eyes were laced with affection as his ridiculously handsome face was bedazzled by a bewitching smile that could cause someone to fall for him instantly. Dawn felt her entire being burning up, her heart quivered, and the fishes in her hands nearly fell onto the ground. Fortunately, Jean was there just in time to catch them. "What are you doing? There are still people around." Dawn's face was blushed crimson as she looked awkwardly at Ginny, who was directly opposite them. Hee hee, I didn't see anything, you guys continue. I'll go look for Jean. Ginny was very easygoing about it and left them alone after sending her regards. Jean and Sean came back right after Ginny had left. Sean had some wild berries and wild game in his hands while Jean hid his hands behind his back like a cunning, sly fox as he strode towards camp while boasting haughtily. Quickly, little madam, look what I've got. I told you I'd get you a token of appreciation, right? You would love it very much. When Jean walked past Ginny, he shot her a look, leaned in for a kiss, and made a beeline towards Dawn. What is it? Dawn turned to look at Jean curiously. Jean was busy picking out fish bones for her at that time. Hee hee. Jean shot Dawn a meaningful look and walked closer to Dawn, who was crouching on the ground. Chapter 24. That thing was so scary, I'm so scared. Let me see, what is it? Dawn cocked her head curiously and tried to see what was behind Jean, but he quickly blocked her view with his body. Don't blink, okay? Immediately, Jean shoved what he had been hiding behind him near to Dawn's face. Dawn, who was expectant, shrieked at the top of her lungs in horror as she saw a ferocious snake hissing at her at only one palm away. Instantly, she felt her heart stop. The grilled fishes in her hands were also flung out. Ah! Petrified, Dawn plunged herself into Jean's arms and clung tightly to his robust waist, her supple body trembling with fear. Jean Fowler. Is your brain filled with crap? Jean barked at Jean as he hastily patted Dawn on her back, consoling her. Don't be scared, don't be afraid, I'm here. It's okay, Dawny baby, I'm right here. Jean's voice was soft and tender, but his eyes that were glaring at Jean were like daggers shoving straight through Jean's heart. Jean quickly let out a laugh and ran away, pulling Ginny's hand. Dawn could quickly calm down when she was in Jean's arms. With the coaxing and the back patting, Dawn's petrified heart had slowly returned to its peaceful state. When Dawn came to her senses, it was only then she realized that she was clinging onto Jean for dear life. She wanted to let go of Jean immediately after she was calm, but as she heard Jean's coaxing and consoling, what was she still in doubt about? If this man before him could not even knock down the walls around her heart, she did not know when in her lifetime would she still find a better one. Her hands that were loose tightened around Jean once again. The series of loosening and tight hug motions filled Jean's heart with joy. She was finally taking the initiative to be physically intimate with him. I am scared. He did it on purpose. Dawn poked her little head out from his chest and pouted pitifully. As she looked up at him, Jean's handsome yet clenched jaw was in her clear line of sight. Dawn lamented in a coquettish voice that was laced with terror. That thing was so scary, I'm so scared. And looked up at Jean innocently and woefully. Such a tone from Dawn was the bane of Jean's existence. His Adam's apple bobbed as he rested his chin on Dawn's head with his hand slowly stroking the back of Dawn's head. It's my bad. It's my fault for letting my Dawny baby get frightened. I'll punish Jean sternly so he doesn't do it ever again. Okay, it's all okay now. Jean was lovingly reassuring her terrified little heart with such a gentle voice and with an immense amount of patience. Locked in an embrace, Dawn could hear his heartbeat quicken as he became increasingly worried for her. Jean? Dawn called out to him. Yes. He was puzzled. His hands were still patting her back gently. You're the best. Hugging you makes me feel so safe. Dawn replied. Jean, I think I'm starting to fall for you. I think I'm starting to like hugging you tightly. I want to do something that makes you happy, and I want to feel your love for me. At that moment, Jean paused everything he was doing. He was stunned, and he was worried that his ears may be playing tricks on him. Under the moonlight, his eyes flickered. Until the woman in his arms hugged him tighter than she already has, he realized that it was not a hallucination. He excitedly peeled Dawn off him and placed his hands on her shoulders as he looked lovingly into her eyes. Under his gaze, she did not know where to look, and it was clear that she was shy. Jean bent down and met her lips with his. He was gentle yet demanding, and he was overwhelmed yet filled with joy. He prodded, and he saw how she swayed, and how she closed her eyes to kiss him back. "Shooting star!" Jenny exclaimed, breaking the love spell on both of them. Dawn looked up quickly and was greeted with the majestic sight of a meteor shower. Each shooting star was dazzlingly bright, with one after another star dragging their elongated trails before they plunged quietly into the sea of stars. It was a stunningly marvelous sight. Dawn laced her hands together and placed them before her nose as she made a wish with her eyes closed. "I wish for Mama Nancy to be well in heaven, I wish for the Tymes to not suffer, and I wish that the man beside me would have a peaceful, prosperous life." Jian, on the other hand, did not believe in wishes. He only believed in himself. But when he saw Dawn's hopeful and wistful eyes, he patted her head and asked, "What did you wish for?" "I can't tell you that," Dawn replied cheekily before she asked, "What about you? Did you make a wish?" "I did." Jian bent down and whispered huskily into her ears, "I wish my madam would fall in love with me soon." After he had said it, he smiled. It was the kind of smile that radiated the joy he felt on the inside, like he had already seen the girl before him living a life that could not be without him. Emotions overwhelmed him as he pulled her into his arms once again. This time, he was the one that was hugging her tightly. Fireflies started coming out of the bushes near the plain that they were at, and the gleaming little gems ignited the joy in Dawn's heart. She escaped Jian's embrace and ran gleefully towards the fireflies. A cheeky firefly had landed on Dawn's nose, causing Dawn to excitedly squint to take a better look at it. Just as she was about to touch it, it flew away. Dawn intuitively started to chase the firefly, only to be greeted with a swarm of fireflies surrounding her as she circled and swayed like they were playing with her. Her surroundings were filled with star-like twinkles. Dawn was in the middle of it all, happily swirling. In Jian's eyes, she was the prettiest, brightest shining star below the night skies. "Jian, who are you to deserve such a pure, unadulterated goodness?" He smiled to himself like he had gotten such a good deal from the heavens, and he was so pleased with himself. Before Jian left, he brought some medication with him and fed it to Dawn before she slept. He told him it was medication to help with her hormonal imbalance. That night, Dawn took the initiative to snuggle up with Jian as she slept, because he told her that there would be wild animals coming out at night, and there would be larger snakes that would emerge. Little bunnies were usually trustingly naive. Before she slept, Dawn told Jian that she wanted to catch the sunrise, so Jian woke up early the next morning, made a bonfire, and had warm water prepared before he woke Dawn up. He could not bear for even a little for her to touch any cold water. He went back to their tent and gave Dawn a morning kiss on her lips, pinched her little nose before calling out to her gently, "Wake up, Dawnie, or you'll miss the sunrise." Dawn was in a daze when slapped Jian's hand away, turned over in a mumble before sitting straight up in a shock. Her face was bleary when she asked, "Is it sunrise already? I'm waiting for you to get up so we can watch it together. Any later than this, we're gonna miss it." Jian handed her clothes and Dawn, who was still not fully awake yet, mimicked Jian's actions as she puts on more clothes before leaving the tent to freshen up. When Jian built the bonfire, he surveyed the surroundings and found a little shore on the right side of the stream that had the perfect view of the entire riverfront. It was the perfect spot to watch the sunrise. Chapter 25. Let's just love unashamedly. When Jian led Dawn to the shore, the river was connected to the sky, reflecting the hills on both sides of the river, and the surface of the river was gleaming. There were also a few birds that glided by the water, chirping and fluttering their wings to the sky. Suddenly, a ray of sunlight pierced the dark gap and sliced open the water surface that was connected to the sky. The fiery red and dazzling light slowly revealed its rounded tentacles to explore this chaotic world, awakening the earth for a new day ahead. Dawn glanced at Jian secretly. The breeze was blowing, the tips of his hair were fluttering, and his beautiful facial features resembled the dazzling skills of the heavens above. Against the background of this romantic morning light, Jian seemed to be coated with a layer of holy light, and he looked so handsome it was unreal. Her little hand clenched nervously, then she stood on tiptoe, took the initiative to kiss Jian's lips gently as she resisted the shyness in her heart. She looked tenderly at the man in front of her and said softly, "In a book, it says that men and women who kiss under the sunrise will be blessed by heaven, have peace in their lives, and grow old together." As he spoke, Dawn had lowered her raised head as Jian's smoldering gaze landed on her. Since the day she married him on behalf of Sheena, she had not thought about leaving, not because she admired Jian so much, but because she wanted to live a safe, simple life until the end of time. As for who the other party is, she did not seem to have much care too much, but slowly she found herself sinking slowly into the webs of love that was intricately woven by this man. She thought, if that's the case, let's love generously and grow old with him then. Dawn really gave Jian so many surprises and excitement throughout this camping trip, so much so he had even started thanking Jean's ancestors for Jean's existence. The sun gradually rose, shortening the shadows of the two of them. Under the rising sun, Jian raised his hand to lift his woman's chin and made her look into his eyes again, which was emotional and charming. "Kiss? Definitely not like how you've done it." Right after, he lowered his head and kissed her. He took her hand and circled them around his waist while he put his big hand on her slender waist. The kiss was fiery and lingering, just like the sunrise, crossing the date line as it meets with tenderness, blooming romance as they tasted each other's sweetness. The sunlight stretched their reflections as if they matched with the skies above them. In the height of their kiss, she heard him say, "In Tagore's book, Stray Birds, he said I love three things in the world: sun, moon, and you. Sun for the morning, the moon for night, and you forever. Meeting you is the best thing that happened to me." The sun has risen, and there were ethereal echoes in the quiet mountains and forests through the breeze as small animals scampered happily in the bushes. "There is a little white rabbit over there." Dawn saw a little white rabbit plunging into the bush next to her and immediately went around Jian to chase after it happily. As she ran, she asked Jian, "If I catch it, can I bring it back and keep it as a pet?" As she was talking, she had already run towards the rabbit. Jian looked at her liveliness like she had only shown her true colors when she was here. After being together, she was happy and innocent. "Okay, madam, you can do whatever you want." Jian followed with a tender chuckle. Dawn was very excited and ran fast. Jian did not want to disturb her at the moment, so he only followed slowly, not letting her out of his sight. "I caught it." "Oh, it ran away again." Dawn was running in the bushes and had just caught the rabbit's little ears before it escaped. Dawn frowned with dissatisfaction and turned to look at Jian and shouted, "You help me. Dawnie, watch out." Almost as soon as Dawn turned around, Jian's eagle eyes saw a wild dog pouncing towards Dawn's back from the bushes, and as it pounced, it howled like a wolf. "Ah!" Hearing the piercing cry of the wild dog, Dawn was so frightened that her legs went numb and all she could do was just hug her head and scream. Jian's body shook when he saw the entire scene unfold. He rushed over like a flying arrow and pulled Dawn into his arms. The wild dog latched directly on Jian's arm, and instantly, blood flowed everywhere. Jian's eyes darkened. He quickly stretched out his hand to pinch the tender part of the wild dog's neck, forcing it to unhinge its mouth, and immediately slammed it to the ground. After wailing a few times, the wild dog died. "Why you're bleeding? Would the dog bite be poisonous?" Dawn, who had just recovered from her shock, looked at Jian, who was dripping with blood, and her whole body was petrified. The ugly, exposed wound looked painful. The corners of her mouth twitched uncomfortably, and tears were about to come down. "It's okay, as long as you are not injured." Jian didn't care about this minor wound. "Don't move, I just saw that there is anti-inflammatory and hemostatic grass here, wait for me." When she was a child, she would always stumble and bleed when she played outside. An older girl told her that those kinds of herbs were anti-inflammatory. She just saw some when she was chasing the rabbit. Jian wanted to hold her back and told her she did not need to bother, but Dawn was so impatient that her strength rose just to break free from him. Fortunately, it was just right next to him, Dawn quickly picked a few plants and ran back quickly. While running, she crushed the herbs in the palm of her hand and applied them to the wound. It was a good thing that the wound was not very large. "I'm sorry, it's all my fault, it's all my fault, if it weren't for me. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be who I am now. If it weren't for you, I would have died a long time ago. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have seen the light." Jian interrupted her self-blame and fright, wiped her tears, and reassured her. "So, don't blame yourself, it's really okay, but if you shed tears, I won't know what to do." Dawn wiped away her tears and promised Jian while sobbing and hiccuping like a child. "I won't run around anymore, I'll stay by your side." "Really?" Jian thought the vows came a little bit too fast, even if he was very excited. "I swear." Dawn raised her small hand and vowed. "Unless someone holds me at gunpoint and forces me to leave you one day, I'd leave to save your life." "What nonsense." Jian tapped her little head directly and said solemnly. "Only you can take my life." "Okay, let's go back quickly. There's medicine for emergencies in the tent." Dawn hurriedly pulled Jian and headed back. The wound on Jian's hands was still bleeding, and everyone was already awake at that time. Initially, when Sean and the others woke up and did not see them anywhere, they wanted to go look for them, but they came back just in time. Sean's expression froze when he saw the injury to Jian's upper arm. He thought they had encountered some sort of ambush, so he hurriedly stepped forward with a fierce expression on his face. As soon as Jian saw Sean's expression, he immediately cast him a look. Sean saw Jian glanced at Dawn and cast another look at him, and he immediately understood. Sean knew that Jian was afraid that his overly worried emotions would make Dawn more worried and make her blame herself even more. Dawn quickly ran back to the tent, took out the medical kit, and simply disinfected the wound and bandaged it. Dawn was still worried about Jian's wound and asked to go back early. Along the way, Dawn took care of Jian carefully. At first, Jian refused it by explaining that it was merely a small wound, but Dawn insisted, and he simply enjoyed her care and even shamefully told her that, "Well, maybe I'll get better faster with a kiss." Dawn. Chapter 26, Dawn's Explosive Eureka Moment. Tom Jinli, who was on his way, had called them several times condemning them for not inviting him when they went camping and demanded that they all come to Imperial Grace Bar with him so he could badger some drinks off of Jian. The Imperial Grace Bar was world-renowned, so when Ginny heard Tom, she wanted in on the fun as well. Although Jian was a little injured, he was elated that his little woman had started to open up herself to him through this camping trip, so he drove the car straight to Imperial Grace since Tom was already there. "You're hurt, you're not allowed to drink tonight." When they had arrived at the bar, Dawn was still nagging Jian. "Okay, we'll leave once they've all settled down," Jian whispered in her ear. The bar was like a gigantic castle that was split in the middle. One half had a vintage style, while the other half was decorated in a modern style. The vintage-looking side had an antique-styled chateau, furniture, and curtains with many people dressed in retro-styled clothing. There were waitresses in ancient Greek robes and couples who were indulging in wine and traditional drinking games, just like the ancient times. On the other side, neon lights and LED strobes were everywhere. It was a spirited scene of intoxicated people, colorful drinks, and dazzling lights. Jian and the bunch made their way to the suite that Tom had booked, while Tom, who was bored alone in the suite, decided to go out and sashayed towards them with a glass of red wine in his hand as he hummed a merry tune. "You guys suck. How could you have fun without me?" Tom complained unhappily. "Your punishment will be downing a bottle of wine each." As he spoke, he looked at Jian's bandaged arm and was shocked for a second before he thought, if he could still come out to have fun, it shouldn't be something severe, and went from a worried mode to a mocking mode. "See, even the heavens did not like what you guys did and just had to give you a token of punishment from the trip. Dr. Tom, I don't think you look as flashy in a white robe as what you have right now." Jean teased as he reached out towards Tom's shoulders and tugged his shirt. "Such a flashy flowery shirt you have on." The group started to have a conversation where they stood, unaware of a predator-like gaze that was glancing heavily in their direction. Look at that chick, so sexy, so juicy. If I could pound her just once I'd die a happy man. A man with a black deep V shirt shot Jason Zook a meaningful look as he pointed his chin in Dawn's direction. At that time, Dawn and Ginny were huddled together in an engaging tea-spilling session. They were nearly sticking together since the surroundings were too noisy for them to talk, while the crowd blocked them off from Gian and the rest. From afar, it looked like only the two of them were out to have fun. Jason followed the man's gaze only to find that the woman he was talking about was a student for military training. Jason let out a huge defeated sigh and downed the drink before him. Don't even think about it, that's Gian's woman. She used to be my student for military training until she stopped coming all of a sudden. Hey, she's your student? What luck. Have you tapped her yet? The man in the deep V nudged. Huh, you mean water tap? Jason grumbled. She's only been in military training for half a day, and that was after she was late for 2 hours. Then, she's just disappeared. She said to have taken time off, but she's Gian's woman, so I just didn't want to muddle into such a muddy swamp. Gian? So what? Just a pathetic forgotten son of the Mose family. His mother had already brought shame to her family by having him out of wedlock, and when she begged several times to want to return to the Mose villa, my grandpa was adamantly against it. The one who spoke up was Sergio Mose, the golden child of the Mose family's third son. Let's go, I'll bring you over to meet your little beauty. Sergio downed his drink and walked towards Dawn. Jason followed after him, eager to join in the fun. Even if Gian was not embracing Dawn, and even if there was not some distance between them, his gaze never left her as she talked with Ginny closely. He felt a disgusting presence approaching them, and while he was talking to Tom, he had subtly pulled Dawn into his embrace. Hey, isn't this the unwanted son of the Moses? As Sergio inched closer to them, he saw Gian pull Dawn into his arms and felt a dull fire burn in him, like someone had snatched his prey from his mouth. Gian and the people around him knew everyone from the Mose family. When they heard that despicable voice, short-tempered Jean had already started mentally sharpening his butcher knife, ready to retaliate only to be halted when Gian shot him a look. Gian then glanced briefly at Dawn and Ginny, then looked back at Jean and the rest. Immediately, they understood. They would not let the girls witness bloody violence, so it was okay to let Sergio win in a couple of verbal squabbles. Gian, with Dawn in his arms, turned around and made his way back to the suite, ignoring the ridiculous barkings and sneers of a certain someone. Tom and the rest followed suit. Sergio, who had his prey snatched from him, then ignored, felt humiliated. What, are your ears broken like your arm? Can't you hear that I'm talking to you? Sergio was infuriated. Useless piece of crap. Are you disabled?